You've been told that worrying means you care, that if you're not stressed, you're not trying hard enough, that peace is something you earn after fixing everything in your life. But if that were true, why does peace always feel one step out of reach? Why does the mind keep racing at night, even when nothing's wrong? Why does the heart feel heavy, even when everything looks fine on the outside? The truth is, worry isn't love. It's not responsibility, and it's definitely not strength. Worry is a habit, a storm the mind keeps replaying because it forgot what stillness feels like. But Buddhism remembers. For thousands of years, Buddhist wisdom has whispered what the modern world forgot: that peace is not something to chase. It's something that's already here, underneath all the noise. And tonight, as you listen, that noise will start to fade. The anxious loops will quiet down. The pressure to control everything will loosen its grip. And for the first time in a long time, you'll feel what it's like to rest in your own being without needing to solve anything. This isn't just a bedtime story. It's a doorway to freedom, to clarity, to a life where your mind no longer bullies your heart, a life without the weight of what if. As these teachings unfold, something inside you will shift. The knots will loosen, the breath will deepen, and the thoughts that used to shout will begin to whisper, then disappear altogether. You're not here to escape your thoughts. You're here to see through them, to remember who you were before the worrying began. So close your eyes. Let go of today. Let the stillness find you. Are you ready? Let's begin. And now, something begins to shift inside, as if the breath just found more room to stretch. The noise that usually runs the show, it's starting to quiet down. Not because the world changed, but because something deeper in you is starting to see clearly. This first lesson is the key that unlocks the gate. What you're about to learn is not about escaping life. It's about finally seeing it for what it truly is. So, lean in. Let it unfold. There's a thought floating through the mind right now. Maybe it's small, maybe it's loud, maybe it's been there for days, or maybe it just slipped in. It's trying to convince you it matters more than it does, that it must be fixed, solved, answered. But here's the quiet truth. That thought is a cloud, nothing more. Most people spend their entire lives staring up at the sky, pointing at clouds, screaming, "Look at that one." And then they try to chase it, grab it, argue with it, or run away from it. But no matter what they do, it passes, because that's what clouds do. And thoughts, especially the anxious ones, are just the mind's version of weather. Worry is just weather, a storm that comes and goes. But the part of you that notices it, that's the sky. That's the awareness that has never been touched by any storm. It's never been drenched, never been torn apart, never been afraid. It simply watches. This teaching is the beginning of peace, because once you stop believing the cloud is you, you stop panicking every time the sky darkens. You start to feel a kind of calm that isn't about pretending everything's fine. It's about knowing that even when it's not fine, you're still here, still untouched. Anxiety feels permanent only when it's mistaken for identity. But when awareness turns inward and sees the thought as a passing formation, something loosens. The grip of fear weakens. The mind becomes something you can witness, not something you must obey. It becomes a sky again. What gives thoughts their power isn't the thought itself. It's the belief behind it. The belief that says, this means something about me. This thought must be true. This feeling must be fixed. But a cloud doesn't mean the sky is broken. It just means there's movement. The moment you stop identifying with the movement and start resting in the space that watches it, everything changes. Buddhist meditation isn't about shutting down the mind. It's about watching it long enough that you stop mistaking the weather for the sky. You begin to notice the breath instead of the thought, the silence instead of the story, and slowly, gently, you return to yourself. Not the version shaped by fear, but the one that's always been clear. This is why monks sit, not to escape life, but to witness it without reacting, to sit like the mountain while clouds come and go. Their thoughts, like ours, still pass through, but they've stopped chasing the storm. And when you stop chasing storms, you stop living in fear of thunder. There is something deeply empowering in realizing that not every thought requires your energy, that noticing a thought is not the same thing as following it, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, letting it pass. You see, worry thrives on attention. It survives by tricking you into solving it. But not every cloud needs to be chased. Some just need to be watched. And when you watch them long enough, you see through them. A thought that once felt heavy becomes a wisp of vapor. A worry that once kept you awake now feels like background noise, and you begin to understand. It was never the thought that hurt you. It was believing it was yours to fix. This is the power of awareness, not the cold kind that disconnects, but the warm, steady presence that says, yes, I see you, but I don't need to become you. The sky doesn't fight the storm. It holds it. It allows it. It doesn't collapse just because thunder rumbles, and neither do you. That part of you that watches the worry, that witnesses the mind spinning, that part is still, quiet, and free. It's never been anxious. It just noticed that anxiety was visiting. This realization becomes a practice. You begin to meet each anxious thought with a different kind of response. Not, what does this mean? But, where did this come from? Not, how do I stop this? But, can I sit with this without reacting? Each time you do this, something builds. A strength, a stillness. The habit of identifying with clouds breaks. The habit of rushing to fix what isn't yours to hold fades. And something deeper begins to lead. The more you watch, the more you see. No thought is permanent. No feeling is fixed. Even the loudest storms begin to whisper when you stop arguing with them. And then, without even trying, you find yourself breathing differently, deeper, slower, as if the body remembered something the mind forgot. You are not here to be a fixer of thoughts. You are not here to win a war with worry. You are here to remember the sky, to rest in the stillness that watches the passing storm. Worry isn't a failure. It's just a cloud, a habit, a pattern, one that gained power from being taken too seriously for too long. But seriousness dissolves in the presence of awareness. When you smile at a cloud, it loses its grip. This isn't denial. This isn't avoidance. This is clarity. The kind that sees thoughts not as enemies, but as weather. Temporary, shifting, unreal. They look solid only when stared at for too long. The mind loves to swirl, to loop, to grab onto one thought and spin it like a washing machine. But even the spinning ends. Even the tightest storm runs out of fuel. And here's the secret. It runs out faster when you stop feeding it attention. Worry is sustained by engagement, by the mental rehearsals, the internal arguments, the obsessive preparation for things that haven't happened. But what if you didn't follow the rehearsal? What if you just watched it, like you'd watch a movie you've already seen 100 times? That's how worry loses power. Not when you crush it, but when you watch it without buying a ticket. And the next time a thought says, "But what if this happens?" you can smile softly and reply, "What if it doesn't?" Let the thought pass. Let the weather change, because it always does. And if you sit long enough, breathe slow enough, and notice gently enough, you'll realize there's a sky in you that never left. A place untouched by all this thinking. A space so vast and free it can hold every cloud without becoming any of them. This is where Buddhism points us, not away from thought, but beyond it. Not into numbness, but into deeper awareness. The kind of awareness that holds pain without panic, discomfort without drama, and uncertainty without collapsing. Worry may visit, but it can't stay unless invited. You are not the storm, you are the sky, and the sky doesn't fear its clouds, it simply watches. So tonight, let the clouds drift by. Let them rise, shift, and fade. There's nothing you need to do. Just rest as the one who sees it all, untouched, undisturbed, wide and free. Let this be your new habit. Not reacting, not fixing, but watching. Because the moment you become the cloud, you suffer. But the moment you remember the sky, you're free. And just like that, the cloud fades. The sky holds steady, but something else begins to stir. Quieter, but stickier. It doesn't shout like a storm. It hums. A background buzz. A script running under the silence. The mind's quiet addiction to rehearsing every possible problem. Not because it enjoys the stress, but because it believes stress is safety. Now comes the moment to untangle that lie. There's a pattern that steals more peace than most people notice. It starts quietly, like a whisper in the back of the mind. What if this goes wrong? What if I forget something? What if they don't respond the way I hope? And without realizing it, a person steps into a loop. The same lines replay, the same problems reimagined. Not once, not twice, but 100 times a day. Each time, the body tenses a little. Each time, the breath shortens. Each time, peace slips further away. This is the habit of mental rehearsal, preparing for the worst again and again, like an actor who never steps off stage. The show is endless. The spotlight never fades. But the audience? It's just the mind watching itself, trapped in its own performance. Buddhism doesn't shame this habit. It understands it. The mind rehearses not because it's broken, but because it's trying to stay safe. It learned somewhere along the way that control feels like protection, that thinking things through in advance might prevent disaster, that scanning for problems is the same thing as solving them. But it's not. Scanning only creates more noise. And what begins as caution quickly turns into a prison. The prison has no bars, only thoughts. Repetitive, recycled, exhausting thoughts. Thoughts that say, if I don't prepare, I'll suffer. But the truth is, the suffering is already happening, right now, in the preparation. And the moment this is seen clearly, the bell can ring. In Zen, a bell isn't just a sound, it's a teaching. It cuts through noise with pure presence. One ring and everything stops. Not because a problem was solved, but because silence broke the loop. The bell doesn't fix the mind, it frees it. The same way thoughts repeat, the body begins to carry the echo. A subtle tension in the chest, a restlessness in the stomach, a tiredness that sleep can't fix. This is the residue of living in tomorrow, of rehearsing what hasn't happened, of giving energy to stories that never arrive. Buddhist practice points to the doorway out, not through control, but through presence. Not through thinking more efficiently, but through letting the thought end. This isn't passive, it's powerful. To notice the thought, thank it, and not follow it. Each time the rehearsal begins again, there's a choice. Join the play, or let the curtain fall. At first, the mind resists. It says, "But this might really happen. Shouldn't I be ready?" And the answer is gentle but firm. Readiness does not require fear. Presence handles what's real. Rehearsal only replays shadows. The belief that mental repetition equals control is the core illusion. In truth, rehearsing future problems doesn't prepare the nervous system, it depletes it. It leaves the body worn out by events that never happened. It disconnects the person from what's actually here. Life becomes a mental simulation, one where the main character is always anxious, even when nothing is wrong. To break this, Buddhism offers a practice as simple as it is profound. Let the bell ring out. Let the thought complete itself. Let it say what it needs to say. And then don't respond. Don't negotiate with it. Don't debate it. Just bow. Like a monk bows to a bell, and return to silence. This silence isn't absence. It's a presence so full, the mind no longer needs to fill it. In that fullness, fear finds no place to root. The habit of rehearsal is like a well-worn path. The brain has walked it so many times that it feels automatic. But awareness cuts new trails. Every time attention shifts from the thought to the breath, from the fear to the feet on the ground, a new path opens. A life outside the loop. People think peace comes from solving problems, but Buddhism teaches peace comes from not creating imaginary ones. Because most worry isn't about real danger, it's about mental projection. And mental projection is an echo chamber. The more one listens, the louder it gets. Silence doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means no longer feeding what's false. It means listening for what's actually here, not the fear of what might be. The bell doesn't ring to stop life. It rings to bring one back to it. Letting the bell ring out is an act of courage. To stop rehearsing isn't laziness, it's trust. Trust that what arises can be handled. Trust that presence is more powerful than prediction. Trust that wisdom doesn't need a script. What happens when the loop is left alone? First, it fights harder. It tries to pull you back in. It tells you you're being irresponsible. It insists that something bad will happen if you don't prepare for it now. But that's just the echo. Let it fade. The bell has rung. Let the words dissolve. Let the breath deepen. Let the mind rest in something older than planning, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on what happens next. In meditation, when thoughts rise, the instruction is gentle. Notice, label, return. Thinking, and then come back to the breath. It seems too simple, but it works, because every time the mind is brought home, the rehearsal ends, the loop breaks, the silence deepens. What's left is awareness, steady, quiet, powerful. And with that awareness comes clarity. Not every future needs rehearsal. Not every possibility needs a plan. Some things unfold better without interference. Some of life's most beautiful moments arrive unannounced, unprepared, and perfectly timed. The more the bell is honored, the more the habit weakens. And one day, a thought rises, an anxious whisper, and instead of following it, there's a pause. And in that pause, a choice. And in that choice, freedom. This is how worry loses its throne. Not by removing every danger, but by stopping the worship of it. There will always be things unknown, always things out of control. But peace was never found in the knowing. It was found in the returning. Let this become the new rhythm. A thought rises, a breath deepens, a bell rings. No panic, no chase, just presence. There's a silence inside you right now that holds more wisdom than 1,000 mental rehearsals. Listen to it. Let it guide you. Let it be louder than the fear. And when the thought comes again, and it will, greet it like a bird on a branch. See it, smile, and let it fly away. Because the bell has already rung, the scene has ended, and you are free. And so the bell rings, not once, but forever. Because the moment the rehearsal stops, the silence becomes a teacher. But what comes next is more subtle, deeper. It's not the loop of thought that haunts now. It's the question underneath it. The quiet ache that asks, why is this happening? What if I never find peace? What am I supposed to do with this life? Not loud, not sharp, just persistent. This is where the mind stops spinning and starts searching, not for survival, but for answers. And this is where Buddhism offers a different kind of wisdom. Not more answers, but a doorway into freedom through not knowing. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't scream, it lingers. A kind that isn't born from pain, but from the need to make sense of pain. The need to wrap life in a conclusion, to reach some final mental finish line that says, "Ah, now I understand." But what if that line doesn't exist? Most people are addicted to understanding, to solving life like a riddle. But some questions weren't meant to be solved. Some were meant to dissolve. The mind, when anxious, seeks clarity not as a luxury, but as a lifeline. It grabs at explanations, theories, scenarios. It digs through the past, fast-forwards through the future, and pulls everything into its spotlight. The belief is simple. If I could just understand this, I could finally be free. But more often than not, the hunt for answers doesn't end the worry. It feeds it. This is where Buddhist insight steps in like a calm wind through a locked room. What if the answer isn't coming because there's nothing to figure out? What if peace isn't hiding behind clarity, but behind the surrender of needing it? The most dangerous thoughts don't scream, "I'm scary." They whisper, "Figure me out." But in Buddhism, there's a saying, drop the hot coal. If thinking burns, release it, not because it's wrong, but because it no longer serves. Letting go of the need to answer is not giving up, it's waking up. A person can spend years asking, "What's wrong with me? What if I made the wrong choice? Why did this happen?" And no answer comes that satisfies for long. Even when answers do arrive, they age quickly. Doubt returns, and the loop begins again. This is not clarity. It's obsession in disguise. True clarity doesn't arrive as a thought. It arrives as a silence that no longer needs the thought. Some of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism begin with paradox. Questions like, who is it that suffers? Or, what is the sound of one hand clapping? They aren't riddles to be solved. They're tools to burn through the part of the mind that must always explain. When a thought appears and says, this has to be figured out, pause, ask, does it? What if the need to figure it out is the cause of tension, not the question itself? What starts as a quest for truth often becomes a trap, a need to label, name, define. But truth is not something the mind can hold in its teeth. Truth is what remains when the grip loosens. And there's freedom in that, because the moment you stop chasing the perfect answer, you begin to see the perfect presence you were avoiding. You begin to feel the breath again, the way it moves without question, the body again, the way it sits without doubt. You start to live again, not think about living, but actually live. The mind will say, but doesn't that mean I'm ignoring the truth? No, it means truth is already here, underneath the noise of mental debate. It means the best answers are the ones that silence the question, not by solving it, but by showing it no longer matters. In Buddhist practice, one of the deepest shifts comes when the practitioner learns to sit with a question, not to answer it, but to be with it, to watch it, to hold it like a guest, and then watch it leave. Because all thoughts do, even the clever ones, even the ones that feel important. There is a softness in surrender, not the collapse of effort, but the release of resistance. The moment the mind says, I need to know, and something deeper says, no, you don't. Not now, not this time. This kind of inner letting go doesn't dull the mind, it refines it. It stops the waste of energy. It returns the focus to what's real. This breath, this body, this moment. Some questions are meant to humble the mind, not because they're unanswerable, but because their only answer is silence. The kind of silence that stops time. The kind that heals more than 1,000 words ever could. The mind will insist that not knowing is dangerous, that it means losing control. But control is a myth, a story. And most people suffer not because they lack answers, but because they refuse to stop asking. So, how does one live without the answer? You feel, you breathe, you move with the current, not against it. You trust that wisdom is in the rhythm of things, not the analysis of them. This is why monks sweep temples in silence, not to clean the floor, but to clear the mind. Every stroke of the broom a reminder. Don't analyze the dust, let it lift. What if the most enlightened moments in life are not the ones filled with aha, but the ones filled with peace, even when the why remains unanswered? You begin to see life as poetry instead of a puzzle, as art instead of architecture. And in that shift, the grip loosens, the breath deepens, the weight drops. The Dharma of no answer is not a resignation, it's a revelation. It's the realization that the part of you demanding clarity is the same part creating the confusion. Peace is what's left when the questions go quiet. You'll still ask. That's human. But you'll ask with a lighter heart. You'll wonder without needing to know. You'll feel uncertainty and walk anyway. And somewhere in that softness, the world opens again. So the next time a thought whispers, "What if I never understand?" you can gently smile and reply, "That's okay." Because maybe understanding was never the point. Maybe living was. And now the silence settles a little deeper. The space where answers used to be has widened. But something else begins to surface, something more physical, more raw. That restless feeling in the body, that flicker in the chest, that heat behind the eyes. It's not a question anymore, it's discomfort. And this is the moment that matters most. Not the moment of knowing, but the moment of staying. What happens now is the turning point. Not because something gets resolved, but because something inside you learns how to stay without flinching. The discomfort starts small. A tightness in the stomach, a twitch in the jaw, a subtle rising of heat that says, move, fix, flee, solve. It doesn't shout, it pulses. That flicker, just enough to pull you out of the moment, just enough to convince you that you need to act, escape, explain. But here's what Buddhism teaches. That flicker is not the enemy, it's the training ground. Most people have been taught to escape discomfort. From childhood, discomfort is treated like a fire alarm, something to run from, something to silence. But inner freedom isn't built by escaping fire. It's built by learning to sit near it without getting burned. The flicker is not danger. It's energy, it's emotion, it's sensation. And the more you chase resolution, the more you train the nervous system to believe something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. You're just feeling. Discomfort becomes a problem only when the mind labels it that way. In truth, it's a signal, an invitation to expand, to build the capacity to stay present without needing the moment to be different. This is the emotional muscle Buddhism points to, not the strength to fight, the strength to sit when the answer doesn't come, to sit when the breath feels short, to sit when the mind says leave, but the soul says stay. Because every time you stay, the flicker flickers less. The panic starts to shrink. The body learns something new. Discomfort, left alone, resolves itself. Not by force, not by logic, by space. When you stop trying to fix it, you start allowing it. And what's allowed softens. But this isn't easy. That's why it's a practice. At first, the flicker feels unbearable, like heat under the skin. The impulse to escape is strong, but if you stay with it, just 5 seconds longer than before, something opens. A breath deepens, a thought passes, and for a brief second, you taste peace without resolution. The strength is not in calming the body instantly. It's in making space for it to calm itself. Each time you sit with discomfort, you teach the body a new rhythm, a slower pace, a new baseline. And the baseline changes everything, because once discomfort no longer triggers panic, the mind stops needing to control every detail. That's how worry starts to die, not by becoming fearless, but by becoming familiar with fear. By noticing the flicker and saying, "I see you, you're allowed here, but you don't get to run the show." And when you don't feed the flicker, it settles. Like water after a stone is thrown, it finds stillness again. This is the root of emotional maturity, not having no reactions, but building enough room inside you to hold them. Discomfort is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of life. And learning to be with it without rushing toward relief, that is the doorway to resilience. The mind is addicted to comfort. It wants relief the moment discomfort shows up. But relief is not freedom. It's a short-term fix. It doesn't build strength. It just resets the pattern. Freedom comes from stretching what you're able to feel without breaking. Every monk, every teacher, every enlightened being has sat with discomfort, not just in meditation, but in life. They've felt hunger, restlessness, grief, frustration. They didn't transcend these things by avoiding them. They became intimate with them. And in that intimacy, the fear disappeared. You begin to see discomfort not as a wall, but as a mirror. It shows you where you still run, where you still grasp, where you still reject yourself. But the mirror isn't there to shame you. It's there to welcome you home. The flicker is the doorway to presence, because it brings you into the body, into the breath, into this moment. It's the bell ringing again, pulling you out of the mental loops into direct experience. And here's the secret. The flicker never lasts as long as the fear of it does. The thought says, "I can't feel this. It's too much." But when you feel it fully, without fighting, it moves, it changes, it softens, and that softening rewires everything. You begin to live less reactively. You begin to choose your response. You stop defaulting to escape. This is what Buddhist teachers mean when they say, make friends with your mind. They don't mean agree with it. They mean stop running from it. Make friends with the flicker. Sit next to it like a companion. Let it tell its story, but don't get pulled into the drama. Stay rooted, stay soft, because the flicker is just energy. It's not personal. It's not proof of failure. It's not something to apologize for. It's just the body remembering how to hold the heat of life. You learn to breathe through it. Not shallow breath, the real kind. The kind that touches the bottom of your ribs and tells the body, you're safe. I'm still here. This builds trust. Not the kind you think about, the kind you feel in your bones. And that trust becomes the foundation of everything else. It's not about never getting overwhelmed. It's about recognizing when it happens and choosing not to add fuel to it. Discomfort isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And if you stay with it long enough, you begin to see. It's not that you were fragile. You were just never taught how to sit still with the storm. Now you are, and with every moment you stay, the storm gets quieter. So when discomfort arises next time, don't rush to fix it. Don't label it. Don't ask how long it will last. Just sit and let it flicker. Because flickers don't burn down forests. But panic can, and you're learning to stay steady. And now that you've learned to sit with the flicker, without chasing relief, without rushing toward escape, something deeper becomes possible. With stillness comes vision. With vision, clarity. But clarity isn't always comforting at first, because what you're about to see isn't what's happening right now. It's what the mind has layered over reality. Old stories, outdated beliefs, invisible scripts that have been running for years. And now, with quiet awareness, those layers begin to reveal themselves, one by one. Most people aren't reacting to the moment. They're reacting to the story they've attached to it. And that story isn't always theirs. It's inherited, absorbed, passed down from voices long gone, from parents, teachers, culture, even childhood memories that the mind turned into lifelong truths without permission. These stories run quietly, like background music, but they control so much. They shape how people see themselves, how they respond to challenge, how they trust, how they love, and more than anything, how they worry. Worry is rarely about the present moment. It's about a story, one that says, "I'm not ready, I'll mess it up. Something always goes wrong. I don't deserve peace, I'll never get it right." These aren't facts, they're dust on the mirror. And Buddhism teaches how to clean the mirror, not by scrubbing at the world, but by seeing through the dirt of the mind. This is not about erasing the past. It's about seeing it for what it is, past. The stories the mind clings to are not your fault, but they become your responsibility the moment you realize they're still in control. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is the concept of delusion, not in the dramatic sense, but in the subtle way the mind misinterprets what it sees. It believes a single event defines the whole self. It believes one opinion is the truth. It believes a thought, repeated enough, becomes real. But just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. And just because something happened doesn't mean it's happening now. Mental clarity begins the moment you start questioning the narrative. That moment you pause and say, "Whose voice is this? Who taught me this was true? What if I no longer agreed with this version of me?" The mirror starts to clear. The mind, when left unexamined, becomes a storyteller. And it doesn't write happy endings. It writes survival plots, drama, fear, urgency, because its job isn't joy, it's protection. But when protection becomes paranoia, the story starts to hurt more than it helps. That's when you know it's time to wake up. False narratives aren't just ideas, they're habits. Habits of thought, habits of identity. I'm the anxious one. I always overthink. I'm the one who gets left. I'm not like them. These aren't identities. They're grooves in the mind, and grooves can be rewired. How? Not through force, through presence. The next time an anxious thought arises, try this. Don't fight it. Don't follow it. Ask where it came from. What belief is underneath? What fear is fueling it? Trace it back. Not with judgment, with curiosity. You might find that the fear is ancient, that it came from a version of you that no longer exists, a scared child, a shamed teenager, a confused adult, a moment frozen in memory but still being played like a movie reel. That moment has shaped a narrative, but it doesn't have to shape your life. Buddhism teaches that identity is fluid, not fixed, not final. The self is not a concrete thing, it's a process, a flowing stream of experiences and reactions and memories. And if the self is fluid, then so are the stories. You are not stuck with them. You can see through them. You can rewrite the script, not with words, but with stillness. When the mirror is dusty, it's easy to mistake the dirt for the reflection. But once the dust is seen for what it is, the reflection returns, clear, honest, untouched. And here's the most powerful thing. Sometimes the dust isn't even yours. Sometimes it's someone else's pain projected onto you, and you believed it. You carried it. But now, gently, you can put it down. No need for blame, no need for shame. just recognition, just the quiet choice to stop believing the voice that keeps pulling you into anxiety. The more you question the narrative, the less grip it has. The less grip it has, the more space you feel inside. Space where there used to be tension. Space where peace can finally return. Clarity is not about having no thoughts. It's about no longer getting tricked by them. The Buddha said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." And now you understand what that means. Because with every story you believe, you build a lens. And with every lens, reality gets distorted. But what if you didn't need a lens? What if this moment was enough, exactly as it is? That's where the mirror starts to shine again, not with perfection, but with presence. And the anxiety that once felt like your default starts to feel optional, not overnight, but gradually, softly. The thoughts will still come. The stories will still rise, but you'll see them differently now. Not as truth, as dust, not as destiny, as noise, not as identity, as habit. And in that seeing, the stories start to lose their power. They become echoes instead of instructions. They become background instead of foreground. And you begin to return, not to some perfect version of yourself, but to the one underneath the narrative, the one who was never broken, the one who never needed fixing, just clarity, just truth, just presence. So the next time a story begins, about your worth, your future, your past, pause. Ask who's telling it. Ask what it's trying to protect. And then thank it and return to the breath, to the body, to the now, because the mirror is already clear. You just stopped looking, and as the mirror clears, something unexpected is revealed, not just the false stories, but the craving beneath them, the deep, almost invisible need for life to make sense, to be stable, to be safe. That need becomes a contract. If I do everything right, nothing will fall apart. But life doesn't sign that contract, and this is where the next teaching unfolds, not as comfort, but as truth. Real peace doesn't come from finding solid ground. It comes from no longer needing it. There's a quiet obsession woven into modern life, the search for security. Not just safety from danger, but emotional security. The need to be certain, the need to know, the need for life to follow a plan. And when it doesn't, panic creeps in. Anxiety flares up, because deep down there's a belief that control equals peace. But control is an illusion, and illusions, no matter how comforting, always collapse. Buddhist wisdom points directly at this core misunderstanding, that suffering doesn't come from the events themselves. It comes from the mind's demand that the events unfold differently. It's the refusal to let life flow, to let the river be a river rather than trying to turn it into concrete. People spend years trying to build a life that feels unshakable. The perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect plan. But no matter how carefully it's constructed, life still cracks it open. Because life isn't a wall, it's water. And the more you try to hold it, the faster it slips through your hands. The illusion of ultimate security is the root of chronic fear, because even when things are good, the mind waits for them to go bad. It rehearses the worst. It anticipates the fall. It lives in hypervigilance. And this, more than anything, exhausts the spirit. Letting go of that illusion is not giving up on safety. It's realizing that real safety isn't the absence of change. It's the ability to float through it. Floating is not weakness. It's not passivity. It's a deep strength, a choice to stop gripping the sides of the boat and trust the water instead, to allow movement without resistance, to trust that even when direction is unclear, presence remains. The teachings of Buddhism don't promise a life without pain. They promise freedom within it. And that freedom begins when you stop waiting for the world to stop spinning. The desire for total security is ancient. It comes from childhood, from moments when things felt out of control and the mind decided that certainty was the only safety. But as adults, that craving becomes a trap, because nothing external can be controlled forever. Jobs change, people change, health changes, even identity changes. So the more you cling to the idea that you must feel safe to be okay, the more fragile peace becomes. True peace is untouchable because it doesn't depend on conditions. It's not found in the environment. It's found in the decision to float with life instead of fight it. Think about the anxiety that shows up when plans don't go perfectly. That tiny sense of panic, that impulse to fix. Beneath that is the belief that things are supposed to stay still, that you were supposed to get it right, that there was some version of life you were meant to hold on to. But Buddhism teaches that holding on is the problem. The suffering isn't because you're floating, it's because you're trying to find a shore that doesn't exist. This doesn't mean giving up goals. It means letting go of the belief that peace depends on outcomes. It means living with direction, but not with obsession. It means allowing life to be uncertain and building strength in the uncertainty. The strongest trees bend with the wind. They don't resist it. And your spirit works the same way. The more flexible your mind becomes, the less anxiety controls it. You stop needing guarantees. You stop needing every door to stay open. You stop needing every question to be answered before you act. Floating is not about detachment. It's about flow. It's about stepping into the stream of experience and moving with it, instead of freezing against the current. This is why some of the calmest people you'll ever meet are the ones who've stopped needing life to match their script. They've stopped arguing with the river, and in that surrender, they found peace. Not because the world changed, but because they stopped demanding it. The mind will tell you that control equals freedom, but the body knows better. It breathes deeper when it's not under pressure. It relaxes when it stops pretending it can hold the ocean in a teacup. You start to notice the little ways control shows up. The way you replay conversations. The way you plan for conversations that haven't happened. The way you scan for risk in every situation. All of that is the body trying to anchor itself to something stable. But what if the anchor wasn't outside? What if the anchor was presence? Presence is the one thing that doesn't shift, not because it's solid, but because it's infinite. The awareness watching all change isn't afraid of change. It simply sees. That's the part of you that floats, the part that doesn't need to know, that doesn't need to control, that trusts that whatever rises will also pass. Surrender doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean retreat. It means participation without possession. It means showing up fully, loving fully, acting fully, without demanding permanence. This is the radical calm Buddhism points to, the calm that says, let it move, let it come, Let it go. I am not the tide. I am the ocean. When you drop the fantasy of ultimate security, something else rises. Freedom. A freedom that doesn't need permission. A freedom that doesn't panic when the map changes. You begin to live lighter, not because everything's easy, but because you're no longer carrying the impossible weight of control. And as you float, you see others gripping, panicking, fighting the current. And instead of judging, you understand. You were there too, maybe yesterday, maybe this morning, but not now. Now you float, with breath, with trust, with stillness inside the motion. And maybe for the first time the waves feel like music instead of noise. Maybe for the first time you let go of the shore and realize you never needed it to begin with. And once the need for a shore disappears, something unexpected is revealed, something so deep it holds every wave and every worry. It's not just the flow of life that brings tension. It's who the mind believes it must be inside that flow. Not what happens, but what it means about the self. The pressure to hold it all together, to protect a version of identity that's always at risk of being hurt, misunderstood, or judged. This next teaching is not about life at all. It's about the illusion of me and what happens when it's gently released. Worry thrives inside the idea of self. Not the body, not the breath, but the story that says, I am this person. I must uphold this image. I must fix these flaws. I must protect this identity at all costs. And once that story takes hold, every experience becomes personal. Every challenge becomes a reflection of worth. Every mistake, a blow to self-image. Every fear, a threat to the character being played. But Buddhism points to a radical possibility. What if there is no one to defend? The concept of no self isn't about being nothing. It's about being free. Free from the endless labor of defending a role. Free from living life as a character in a mental movie. Because that's what ego is. A role, a name, a face, a set of opinions, achievements and failures stitched together to create a sense of identity. But it's unstable. It shifts with every compliment, every criticism, every gain, and every loss. And the more tightly the identity is gripped, the heavier life becomes. When the mind says, I must succeed, it doesn't mean survive. It means my identity depends on this. When it says, they're judging me, it's not about safety. It's about protecting the idea of who I think I am. And in this way, anxiety becomes a full-time job, maintaining, proving, fixing, performing. The pressure is unbearable. But here's the truth. The pressure only exists if the identity is believed to be real. Buddhism doesn't ask you to destroy your personality. It asks you to see through it. To notice that the you being defended is just a thought, an image, a lens through which life is interpreted. And once the lens is removed, reality becomes lighter. This is why masters speak of weightlessness, because without the burden of self, problems stop being personal. They're just events, just sensations, just life moving, without the filter of me versus the world. This shift is not philosophical, it's practical. Consider the difference between this problem is happening versus this problem is happening to me. That tiny addition changes everything. It brings in emotion, narrative, identity, defense. But when the me dissolves, so does the story. Worry is fueled by the idea that the self must be protected. But if the self is just a role, just a label, then what exactly is being protected? Even the thoughts that say, "I can't let go of who I am," are still part of the same illusion. Because who are you before that thought appears? That's the question Buddhism invites you to explore, not with logic, but with awareness, with silence, with the deep listening that goes beyond words. Sit with that question. Who am I before this thought? Before this fear? Before this identity I'm defending? And what arises is not an answer. It's space. It's a kind of presence that doesn't need to be named. This presence is weightless because it carries nothing. It doesn't argue, it doesn't compare, it doesn't perform, it just sees. And in that seeing, problems lose their grip because they no longer hook into a personal story. When someone criticizes, it's not about you. It's about sound, tone, expression. When a plan fails, it's not about your worth. It's about conditions changing. When fear rises, it's not proof of weakness. It's just energy moving through the body. Without identity, everything is just happening, like weather, like wind. And just like that, worry starts to evaporate. This doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean disconnection. It means living fully, without the armor of ego. It means being able to feel everything, without turning every feeling into a statement about who you are. It means being sad without being a sad person. It means being wrong without becoming a failure. It means being praised without needing to become a success. This kind of freedom terrifies the ego, because the ego survives by staying relevant, by taking credit and taking blame, by keeping the story alive. But the moment you stop feeding it, something else opens. A kind of peace that no achievement can match. A kind of freedom that no reputation can buy. This peace is not passive. It's alive. It's the kind of presence that speaks softly, acts clearly, and moves without fear. Because when there's no self to protect, there's nothing to lose. And without something to lose, anxiety has no place to grow. This is the weightlessness of no identity, not emptiness, but fullness without form. You start to live from awareness itself, from the part of you that isn't bound by stories, opinions, or history, and slowly the mind adapts. It stops referencing the past for proof. It stops demanding a future for validation. It stops turning life into a mirror for ego. And life becomes what it always was, unfolding, undivided, free. The question isn't, who am I? The real question is, who would I be without the need to answer that? In Buddhism, this is called returning to the original mind, the unborn mind, the awareness before labels. It's not abstract, it's immediate, right now, right here. In this breath, there is no name, no role, no judgment, just this, just presence, just life, without a center. And in that centerlessness, there is space for everything: joy, sadness, uncertainty, silence. Nothing needs to be rejected. Nothing needs to be held too tightly. And this is how you live without anxiety, not by fixing every problem, but by seeing through the one who thinks it's their job to fix everything. You don't need a stronger self. You need less self. Not to vanish, but to remember that the one watching is already free. Let go of the identity that suffers and float in the weightlessness of what you've always been. The mind will still label, that's its nature. But now you know the truth. You are not the label, you are the space around it. And when identity is let go, when the weight of self begins to dissolve, something strange and powerful rises in its place. A silence that doesn't need to be understood. But even here, the mind looks for a final answer. It wants the journey to have a shape, the healing to have an ending, the lesson to come with a ribbon. This next teaching points to the quiet pressure hiding beneath so many anxious thoughts. The pressure to finish, to resolve, to wrap things up in a perfect, controlled way. And here, Buddhism offers a different rhythm, a deeper peace, one that comes not from completion, but from learning to stay open. Most people have been conditioned to treat life like a checklist. Graduate, get the job, find the person, heal the past, fix the flaws, be happy. But what happens when life doesn't line up that way? When things remain unresolved, undone, or unclear? For many, anxiety fills that gap. It tries to close the loop, even if it has to invent closure. It tells stories, it seeks conclusions, it waits for the moment when everything will feel settled once and for all. But that moment never comes, because life isn't a finished product. It's a living thing, and living things aren't meant to be complete. They're meant to grow, to evolve, to remain in motion. The craving for completion creates suffering because it teaches the nervous system that unfinished means unsafe, that not knowing equals danger, that if something is left hanging, something is wrong. But Buddhism sees things differently. It teaches that peace does not come from perfect endings. It comes from no longer needing them. The obsession with closure is the mind's way of feeling in control. But control, as we've seen, is not peace. It's tension. It's the constant effort to shape reality into a story with neat edges. But real life doesn't operate that way. Conversations end awkwardly. Relationships fade without explanation. Plans fall apart mid-sentence. Healing doesn't follow a timeline. Growth happens in spirals, not straight lines. And when we learn to stay with what's incomplete without trying to fix it, something remarkable unfolds. The body softens. The mind stops gripping. The heart begins to trust something deeper than certainty. The Dharma of unfinishedness is not a resignation. It's a release. It's the freedom to live in the open field without needing fences around every thought or experience. It's the space to let things be half-formed, half-healed, half-known, and to love them anyway. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean giving up on progress or abandoning care. It means seeing that perfection is not a requirement for peace. That closure is not a prerequisite for rest. That the unfinished moment still contains all the beauty, all the clarity, all the truth that's needed right now. Worry clings to the idea that when this is resolved, I'll finally be okay. But peace comes from realizing you already are okay, even when things are unresolved. Think of how often the mind loops because of this craving. a conversation that didn't end well, a decision that wasn't clear, a goal that wasn't reached. It picks at the thread, trying to tie a bow around it. But sometimes there's no bow, just thread, just breath, just life unfolding with no final line. And that's not a problem. That's freedom. In meditation, thoughts often arise that feel like they demand attention. Unfinished thoughts, unfinished feelings. But the instruction is always the same. Return. Return to the breath. Return to the present. Return without needing to tie everything up, because the loop only continues when it's fed. What if healing didn't mean fixing every broken piece, but learning how to live with cracks that still hold beauty? What if the open door wasn't a flaw, but an invitation? Buddhism teaches impermanence not just as an idea, but as a way of seeing. Everything changes, everything evolves, everything slips through our grip eventually. And once this is seen clearly, the panic about the unfinished begins to dissolve. Because what's unfinished today might open tomorrow, or it might not. But life still flows. The most peaceful people aren't the ones who've resolved everything. They're the ones who've stopped trying to. They've made peace with loose ends, with half answers, with growing into the next version of themselves without needing to know exactly who that is. And they've stopped demanding the world reflect their internal timelines. The teaching is simple. You don't need to finish the sentence to be understood. You don't need to close the chapter to rest. You don't need to solve the puzzle to be whole. Anxiety often pretends to be ambition. It says, I just need to finish this so I can relax. But every time something is finished, something new appears. The rest is always out of reach, until you stop chasing it. Then, without effort, rest arrives. Because rest was never about completion. It was about presence. The deeper practice is staying open in the unfinished moment, not knowing how it ends and still choosing to show up, not needing clarity and still offering compassion, not having all the answers and still breathing deeply. Some of the most profound spiritual realizations come when something unresolved is finally accepted, not solved. When the heart opens around what hurts, instead of trying to patch it. This is not weakness. This is strength of a different kind. A soft, steady strength that says, I don't need life to make sense in order to live it. The Buddha did not say, life must be perfect. He said, life is suffering, and then showed how suffering ends, not by cleaning up every mess, but by changing our relationship to the mess. The Dharma of unfinishedness is a doorway to rest. To live inside it is to release the pressure, to finally exhale, to stop rushing toward a version of peace that only exists after everything is tied up. Let it stay open. Let it remain incomplete. Let the healing continue without needing to be declared finished, because life doesn't bloom all at once. It blooms in seasons. It blooms in layers. And sometimes the most beautiful parts are the ones still becoming. So when the next anxious thought says, this must be resolved, meet it with a quiet smile and say, maybe not. And feel the freedom in that. Because maybe the moment doesn't need a full stop. Maybe the comma is enough. And just as the unfinished is accepted, as the comma becomes enough, a subtle pressure lifts. But underneath that space, something else reveals itself, quieter but older. a tension that often hides behind every anxious plan, every mental loop, every search for control. It's not logic, it's not story, it's fear, not of what has happened, but what might. The kind that shows up in the background of thoughts, whispering warnings, creating shadows out of nothing. And now comes the next teaching, one that empties fear of its illusion and shows what's truly there when we stop believing in its shape. Fear feels like a wall, like something solid, like something real. But most of what the mind fears isn't real at all. It's imagined, projected, built entirely from thought, not from what's happening, but from what could happen. And Buddhist insight goes directly to the root of this illusion, not by fighting it, but by examining it. Anticipated pain is different from actual pain. Actual pain is grounded in sensation. It has temperature, texture, a clear location in the body. It happens now. Anticipated pain, however, lives only in thought. It arrives early. It brings no proof. It repeats like an echo with no origin. It feels real, but it's hollow. It's the mind filling an empty cup with imagined suffering. That's where this practice begins, with the recognition that fear is a cup that looks full but holds nothing. It pretends to be urgent. It demands preparation. But if brought into stillness and held up to the light, its contents disappear. Buddhist practice doesn't dismiss fear. It studies it. It welcomes it to the cushion. It says, "Come closer, show yourself." And in that space of inquiry, fear softens, because it can't survive the light of awareness. It needs movement. It needs reaction. It needs belief. Without those, it loses weight. Fear tells stories. It says, "This will go wrong, that will break, you'll lose, you'll fail." But those are just thoughts, images on the screen of the mind. And the deeper practice is to stop being the actor in the story and start being the witness. Instead of asking, "How do I stop being afraid?" the question becomes, "What is this fear made of?" And when that question is asked, not from panic, but from stillness, the mind begins to slow, the emotion begins to settle, and what once felt sharp begins to unravel. Fear, when met with curiosity instead of resistance, reveals its own emptiness. Buddhist visualization helps guide this process, not to escape the fear, but to see through it. Picture the thought that's generating fear, a worst-case scenario, a painful memory, a looming possibility. Then hold that image gently in the mind. Don't push it away. Let it stay. Now breathe. And with every exhale, ask the body, "Where is the pain?" Not the imagined one, the real one, the one that's here right now. Most of the time, it isn't there. There's tension, maybe, a tight chest, a racing heart, but not the catastrophe the mind was convinced was real. That's the gap. That's the insight. The mind believes it's preparing for reality, but it's reacting to thought. And thoughts can't hurt you unless you believe them without question. This is where meditation becomes medicine. Not because it calms you down, but because it trains you to look directly at the structure of fear. It trains you to ask, is this happening? Or is this just thought pretending to be a threat? The fear of loss, for example, often comes before anything is lost. The fear of failure arrives before anything has been attempted. The fear of being judged shows up even when no one is watching. It's all rehearsal, all projection. and all of it dissolves when seen clearly. The truth is, fear doesn't come from danger. It comes from disconnection, from believing the mind over the moment. When awareness returns to the body, fear loses its fuel. When the breath deepens, the story starts to blur. And when you stop feeding the fear with attention, it begins to fade, like a mirage that looked like water from far away, but was always just heat on the road. This doesn't mean you stop feeling fear. It means you stop mistaking it for prophecy. You stop letting it control your actions. You stop building your identity around it. Because once fear is recognized as hollow, it can no longer run the show. In Buddhism, there's a story about a monk walking through the forest at night. He hears a rustle. His heart races. His mind screams, "Snake!" He freezes. But when the moonlight shifts, he sees it's only a rope. The panic vanishes. The snake was never real, only the belief was. This is how fear works. It shows you a rope and calls it danger. It fills the body with chemicals, thoughts, images, and commands. But the moment awareness steps in, the illusion breaks, not through force, but through seeing. You don't need to argue with fear, you just need to see what it's made of. It's just thought, just projection, just a hollow cup, pretending to be full. And this realization isn't abstract. It's deeply physical. The more often you sit with fear without obeying it, the more the body learns a new response. Less panic, more breath, less reaction, more space. That space is what Buddhism calls freedom. Not freedom from all difficulty, but freedom from false beliefs. The belief that fear must mean truth. The belief that preparation prevents pain. The belief that imagining the worst keeps you safe. These are habits, old mental patterns, and they lose power the moment you stop feeding them. This is what fear cannot survive, non-participation. The moment you stop rehearsing, the performance ends. The moment you stop reacting, the nervous system begins to recalibrate, and the fear that once felt heavy becomes just another thought passing through. You are not the fear. You are the awareness behind it. You are not the prediction. You are the presence that sees. So, when fear rises, don't fight it. Turn toward it. Ask, is this happening, or am I imagining it? And let that question bring you home, home to your breath, home to your body, home to this moment where fear has no substance, only suggestion. Let the cup be empty. Let the thought pass through, and let the silence return. And once fear's illusion is exposed, once the empty cup is seen for what it is, another question naturally arises. If fear cannot be fought, if anxiety cannot be reasoned with, then how do we truly move past it? This is where the mind often stiffens, believing that letting go means giving in, that surrender means weakness, that peace comes from conquering. But Buddhism points to something far more subtle and far more powerful. The next teaching begins here, not with control but with surrender, not the collapse of effort but the soft, steady power of not resisting life. Anxiety is a fight against what is, not always loudly. Sometimes it whispers. But behind the noise is resistance. Resistance to discomfort, to uncertainty, to not knowing. The mind believes if it just resists harder, holds tighter, plans longer, it can stop the unwanted from arriving. But fear is not dissolved through force. It's loosened through space. The space that opens when resistance ends. Non-resistance is not the same as giving up. It's not about becoming passive. It's about shifting from fighting life to flowing with it. It's the deep recognition that anxiety feeds off tension, and tension grows from resistance. And every time we tighten against the moment, we strengthen the very thing we're trying to escape. The body knows this before the mind does. It contracts when it's afraid. Shoulders rise, the jaw locks, breath shortens. These aren't random symptoms. They're physical expressions of saying no to the present. The practice of surrender begins by recognizing this contraction, not judging it, and then letting it soften, moment by moment. Softening is strength. It takes courage to stop pushing, to stop needing to win, to stop resisting what already is. And in that softness, fear begins to unravel, not because it's solved, but because it's no longer being fed. Trying to defeat anxiety directly often leads to frustration. It's like punching a shadow. It doesn't work, and it leaves you exhausted. But what happens if you turn and walk away from the shadow? It can't follow, because it's made from you. It exists through your opposition. This is what Buddhism means by surrender, not submission, but release. Releasing the illusion that control leads to peace. Releasing the fight against every uncomfortable emotion. Releasing the need to fix what may not be broken. In mindfulness practice, there's a teaching called letting be. It means allowing whatever arises to exist, without needing to push it away or pull it closer. Anxiety, frustration, sadness, they come and go, but they only linger when we cling to them or resist them. Letting be is surrender in action, not laziness, not indifference, but trust. Trust that the mind doesn't need to tighten every time a wave moves through. Trust that emotions rise and fall naturally when we don't interfere. Trust that presence is enough. One of the most common reactions to anxiety is the belief that it shouldn't be here. I shouldn't feel like this. This feeling is wrong. I have to get rid of it. But those thoughts are not helping. They're resistance disguised as logic. And resistance, no matter how smart it sounds, always strengthens the cycle. What if the next time anxiety appeared, you said, "You can stay"? What if the breath didn't rush to fix, but simply welcomed what's here? That act of surrender would not make the feeling stronger. It would make it visible, and visibility leads to transformation. Surrender is not something the mind can figure out. It's something the body remembers. The exhale that doesn't need to hold tension. The muscles that don't need to brace for impact. The eyes that can rest without scanning for threat. This is not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending everything is fine. It's the opposite. It's feeling everything without the extra layer of resistance. There's a moment in Buddhist teaching where a student asks, "What do I do when fear rises?" The master replies, "Welcome it in, bow to it, then sit together in silence." Not because fear deserves praise, but because fear loses power when it's no longer the enemy. Non-resistance removes the verses from your life. No more you versus anxiety, you versus the past, you versus the future. It becomes simply you with whatever is here. And in that withness, space opens. The space to breathe, to soften, to feel without flinching. And in that space, clarity arrives. The kind of clarity that isn't loud or dramatic, but steady, calm, and deeply rooted. You begin to see that emotions are like weather. They come, they pass. No storm has ever lasted forever, and when you stop trying to push the clouds away, you notice the sky was never broken. The act of surrender is the act of remembering that nothing is permanent, not pain, not panic, not pressure. What stays is the awareness watching it all. This awareness is not passive, it's presence. And presence, when not resisting, becomes your greatest strength. There's a quote from Ajahn Chah, a Thai forest monk, who said, "Try to let go, not with the thought, but with the heart. Let it fall off naturally, don't force it." This is the essence of surrender, not forcing a release, but allowing it, allowing the breath to come and go, allowing the thought to rise and fall, allowing the moment to be what it is, without needing it to be different. This is how worry ends, not by conquering it, but by removing the resistance that gave it shape. So the next time the heart tightens, try something radical. Don't resist it. Let it move. Let it vibrate. Let it be here without needing to explain or escape. And notice what happens when the fight stops. Notice what appears in the silence that follows. A soft strength, a quiet clarity, a stillness that doesn't need protection. Because when you stop resisting life, you stop fearing it. And when you stop fearing life, you finally begin to live. And when resistance dissolves, when the grip loosens, when fear no longer dictates the breath, something unexpected begins to emerge. The attention turns outward. The space that was once filled with control now feels open, and in that openness, a deeper instinct stirs, not to protect the self, but to ease the suffering of others. What begins as worry slowly starts to shift, and in that shift, a new form of power is born, not through dominance or defense, but through compassion. This is the next doorway, turning anxiety about others into presence for them, transforming mental tension into meaningful care. Worry about others often disguises itself as love. It says, "I care so much, that's why I'm afraid." But worry, unchecked, is not service. It's tension. It's the mind creating futures that haven't happened, carrying stories it can't control. Compassion, on the other hand, doesn't imagine. It responds. It meets the moment as it is and chooses kindness instead of fear. The difference lies in energy. Worry drains. Compassion gives. Worry spins. Compassion grounds. Worry repeats. Compassion acts. In Buddhism, compassion isn't optional. It's the natural result of clarity. When the illusion of separation fades, when the idea of a solid self dissolves, what's left is empathy. Not because it's noble, but because it's obvious. The pain in another is no longer theirs. It's pain. And when pain is seen clearly, the heart responds. But worry often blocks that response. It gets tangled in what might go wrong. It loops on worst-case scenarios. It clutches at the idea that thinking harder might somehow prevent suffering. But suffering is not prevented by mental rehearsal. It's eased by presence. This is why turning worry into compassion is not only a gift to others, it's medicine for your own mind. Because when attention moves from fear to care, the heart opens, the breath deepens, the tension lifts. Worry narrows focus. It collapses the world into a small, anxious spiral. But compassion expands it. It says, yes, things might be hard, but I can show up anyway. I can offer something real. I can respond instead of react. And in that response, worry begins to transform. It becomes something you can carry with dignity, not a weight, but a path. This transformation begins with one simple shift, asking, what can I give right now? Not what can I fix, not what can I prevent, but what can I offer of my time, my attention, my care. Buddhism teaches that generosity is one of the foundations of mental freedom. Not just financial giving, but the generosity of presence, of listening, of soft speech, of small acts done with full attention. When worry about someone arises, the first instinct is to solve, to control their path. But often, the most compassionate thing you can do is be with them, not above, not ahead, beside. Worry says, I need you to be okay so I can be okay. Compassion says, I'm here with you, whatever happens. That shift breaks the ego's grip. It changes the relationship from one of fear to one of freedom. Even when you cannot change a situation, your presence matters. Your willingness to witness without judgment, to stay without controlling, to care without condition. This is what transforms tension into peace. This is what Buddhism calls karuna, the tenderness that arises when suffering is seen clearly and met with care instead of avoidance. Sometimes this means helping directly, cooking a meal, making a call, offering encouragement. Other times it means saying nothing, doing nothing, just holding the space for someone else's process to unfold. There is power in being a quiet presence in a loud world. There is healing in being a steady presence in someone's chaos. And there is peace in realizing you don't need to carry another person's pain to show them you care. You only need to be present with it, without turning it into a storm inside your own mind. This is how compassion works. It lets you touch pain without being drowned by it. It lets you support others without abandoning yourself. And something beautiful happens when this becomes a habit. The same mind that once spun in worry begins to find purpose in caring. The same thoughts that once looped become acts of kindness. The same anxiety that once turned inward begins to move outward as gentle service. It's not about being perfect. It's about being sincere. And the more you live this way, the more your nervous system starts to shift. You begin to feel safer in openness. You begin to feel stronger in softness. You begin to see that compassion is not a feeling, it's a choice, and that choice is always available, even for yourself. Because self-compassion is the root of all compassion. If you cannot hold your own fear with tenderness, how will you hold anyone else's? Turning worry into service means starting here. It means noticing when anxiety about others is rising and pausing, breathing, asking, can I show up instead of spiraling? Can I turn this imagined pain into real presence? Can I let go of the outcome and offer care anyway? And slowly, your attention changes shape. It stops rehearsing what might go wrong and begins practicing what could go right. And what goes right isn't always the outcome. Sometimes it's the presence itself, the smile you didn't fake, the call you made without advice, the silence you held without needing to fix, the way you stayed open when everything told you to close. This is the cloak of compassion, not armor, not performance. A warmth you wrap around the moment, not to shield it, but to witness it, not to control it, but to bless it. And as you wear that cloak more often, something amazing happens. You stop being afraid of not knowing. You stop trying to predict. You start living more honestly, more generously. Because you've seen now, worry may clench, but compassion opens. Worry holds back. Compassion reaches. Worry isolates. Compassion connects. So let worry become the bell that calls you back to the heart. Let it remind you not to overthink, but to care. Let it be your signal, not to spiral, but to serve. Because when you meet the world this way, the fear that used to hold you starts to fall away. Not because you defeated it, but because you outgrew it. And once compassion begins to move through you, once care replaces the need to control, something even deeper becomes available. Not a technique, not a philosophy, a space, a silence, a stillness that was always there, waiting beneath the surface. Every act of worry, every spiral of thought begins after something else, something older than thinking, something untouched. This is where the next doorway opens, to rest in the space before the mind starts thinking, the stillness before thought, the source where worry cannot take root, because the one who worries has not yet arrived. There's a quiet truth buried beneath all anxiety. It has to be thought before it can be felt. It has to form, shape, appear. It needs a thinker to believe it, a self to own it. But what happens before that? Before the thinker steps in, before the story begins, what is there? Buddhism calls this the original mind, the unborn mind. Not something special, not something mystical, something direct, accessible, here, right now, a space that can be touched not by effort, but by stillness. It's the place you return to when you stop needing to understand, when the breath becomes the only thing worth noticing, when the pause between moments stretches just long enough for you to notice you're not thinking, but you're still aware. This is not a state to be achieved. It's what's always been here. Underneath the noise, behind the thinker, before the thought. It's not about trying to feel peaceful. It's about noticing what remains when you're not trying to do anything at all. Pre-thought awareness is not blankness. It's fullness. Pure clarity before concepts appear. It's not about zoning out. It's about zoning in so deeply that you go under the words, beneath the mind's surface, to the calm that never needed fixing. In meditation, there's a point when the breath fades into the background and what remains is awareness itself. That awareness is not a thought. It doesn't judge, it doesn't compare, it doesn't plan. It simply sees. And in that seeing, nothing is missing. Worry needs something to attach to, a problem, a scenario, a storyline. But in pre-thought awareness, there's no story, just space, just breath, just presence. The moment the thinker arises, the story starts. But before that, there's only now. Learning to rest in this space is not about escaping life. It's about returning to what's true before life becomes a narrative. It's about seeing how often the mind tries to overlay something on top of what's already complete. And what's already complete doesn't need commentary. This is not suppression, it's revelation. When you sit long enough without chasing or controlling, the mind begins to settle, not because it's been silenced by force, but because the one trying to control it has stepped aside. And what's left? Awareness without identity, stillness without effort, clarity without thought. This is the root of every Buddhist teaching. That freedom is not a future state. It's the natural quality of awareness when it's not tangled in thought. And you don't need years of training to find it. You only need to stop chasing and start noticing. Start noticing what's here before the next thought, before the next fear, before the next plan or label. It helps to use the breath as a doorway, not to control it, but to follow it, gently, honestly, with your full attention. At the bottom of the exhale, there's a pause, a still point. That pause is not empty, it's alive. It's the gateway back to pre-thought awareness. You don't need to name this space. In fact, naming it pulls you out of it. Just rest in it. Let it hold you. Thoughts will still arise. That's okay. The practice is not to stop them, but to see them from the place that existed before them, to witness the moment a thought appears and say, "There it is," without grabbing it. Over time, this space becomes more familiar, more accessible. You begin to spend more time as the observer and less time as the thinker. And from that shift, worry loses its roots. Because its roots were always buried in belief. Belief in the thought, belief in the story, belief in the thinker. But when awareness comes before thought, the story has nowhere to stick. This is what brings deep peace, not the absence of thoughts, but the freedom to watch them rise and fall without following. In this space, the mind no longer runs your life. It becomes a tool, not a master. And that shift changes everything. The next time anxiety creeps in, don't meet it with more thought. Return to before. Drop into the breath. Let the body lead. Feel the moment before the thought forms. That moment holds more truth than anything the mind can create. That moment is the source of presence. It's where compassion begins, where clarity lives, where suffering has no place to grow. This isn't about staying in this space forever. It's about knowing it's always here, that you can return any time, that no matter how loud the world gets, there's a silence inside you untouched by it all. And that silence is not passive. It's alive. It listens, it sees, it heals. This is why great teachers speak so softly, because the truth doesn't need volume, it only needs presence. And this presence is yours. Not because you earned it, because it's your nature, what you've always been underneath the doing, the fixing, the worrying. When you rest here, life becomes simpler. Not because the outside changes, but because the inside stops adding weight to it. You stop turning moments into problems. You stop turning thoughts into warnings. You stop turning yourself into someone who needs to be saved. You already are, because you never left. You only got lost in thought. And now, gently, steadily, you're coming home. And as the stillness before thought settles deeper, as awareness begins to feel more natural than the noise it used to chase, another form of suffering begins to show itself. Not loud, not urgent, but constant. Regret, a quiet replay of what went wrong, what could have been done differently, what never got a second chance. And this next teaching leads us right into it. Not to rewrite the past, but to release it. Not to justify or explain, but to end the habit of dragging yesterday's weight into today, because regret is just worry turned backward, and forgiveness is the only thing strong enough to let it go. Regret begins with memory. A moment remembered not with peace, but with tension. A decision that feels unfinished. A word that wasn't taken back. A mistake still echoing. The mind returns to these moments not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that something was permanently broken. Fear that some part of the story is forever stained. Fear that because it happened, it must define who you are now. This is the cycle. Memory leads to judgment. Judgment creates identity. Identity reinforces the story. And the story becomes a source of pain that feels too old to fight, but too strong to ignore. Buddhism offers a different path, not denial, not suppression, not moral high ground. Just this: let it be seen, let it be felt, and then let it be released. Because what keeps regret alive is not the event. It's the resistance to what happened. It's the belief that it shouldn't have happened, and the body still trying to solve a moment that no longer exists. Regret is not reflection. It's a loop. It's the emotional version of chewing gum that lost its flavor years ago, but still keeps getting chewed. It offers no nourishment, just repetition. And like all habits of worry, it survives through attention. The first step in forgiveness, then, is to stop feeding it. Not by ignoring it, but by stepping back far enough to see it clearly. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to? Is it a moment, or is it the story I built around it? Forgiveness is not about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about letting go of the idea that you need to keep hurting, that you must carry it as proof of your remorse, that guilt is somehow a spiritual currency. But guilt doesn't heal anything. It only repeats the pain. Real forgiveness starts where blame ends, and that includes self-blame. Because often the harshest judgment doesn't come from others. It comes from the voice inside that says, "You should have known better." That voice is not wisdom. It's just an echo. And Buddhist practice helps you meet that voice with something it's never been shown: compassion, not as an excuse, but as truth. Because the self you are now is not the self who made that choice, and the conditions that led to the moment were never entirely in your control. They never are. This is one of the most liberating realizations in Buddhist psychology. No self exists in isolation. Every decision is influenced by causes and conditions, by environment, emotion, history, belief. That doesn't remove responsibility. It removes the illusion that you were ever separate from the world acting through you. With that understanding, the past stops being a prison. It becomes something softer, a teacher, not a tormentor. The process of forgiveness begins in the body. Feel where the regret lives. Is it in your chest, your throat, your stomach? Don't name it. Just notice. Let it speak, not in words, but in sensation. Then bring breath to it, not to fix, just to witness, just to say, I'm here now because most regret is not asking to be solved. It's asking to be seen. And once it's seen, it starts to loosen. The emotional knot begins to uncoil. The narrative slows down, and something new begins to rise. Understanding. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. It's a practice. Some days it flows easily. Other days it gets stuck. But every time you choose presence over punishment, the cycle weakens. And this applies not only to yourself, but to others. Because sometimes the worry isn't about your own past. It's about what someone else did, what they said, what they failed to understand. And the mind plays it again and again, trying to make sense of it, trying to undo it. But the longer you carry someone else's behavior as your burden, the longer you suffer on their behalf. Forgiving them doesn't mean agreeing with them. It means freeing yourself from the need to keep reliving what they did. Because every time the story is repeated, the pain gets rehearsed. But forgiveness interrupts that rehearsal. It says, I release you from the role you played in my pain, not because you asked, but because I no longer need to carry the script. And in that release, space opens, not for forgetting, but for healing. Forgiveness is a decision not to let the past define your nervous system anymore, not to keep waking up in yesterday, not to build an identity from a single moment that already passed. And the more you forgive, the less weight you carry into the present, the more room there is for real peace. There's a Zen story about a monk who carries a woman across a river. Later, another monk says, "Why did you carry her? That's not allowed." And the first monk replies, "I put her down at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her?" That's what regret does. It keeps carrying what has already been released. It picks it up again and again. But when you see this clearly, you can choose to put it down. Every moment is an opportunity to forgive, to let go, to come back. Not because the past changes, but because the past doesn't get to dictate your peace anymore. This is the release valve. This is the end of recycled pain. This is the breath that says, I don't need to carry this story one more step. Because the moment you let go of regret, the mind stops spinning backward, and the heart, unburdened, begins to rest forward. And once the weight of regret is laid down, once forgiveness begins to clear the emotional air, something subtler becomes easier to notice. The echoes, not from others, but from within. The arguments that never happened, the voices that never stop. The internal back and forth that plays on loop, even when nothing is actually unfolding outside. This is where many people stay trapped, inside an invisible room of imaginary conversations. And this next teaching helps you step out of it, not by winning the argument, but by realizing there's no one there to argue with. Internal conflict is one of the most exhausting habits of the mind. A single comment, a look, or even a memory can trigger it. Suddenly, the mind fills with voices. What should have been said, what you wish you'd said, what they'll probably say next time. These aren't reflections, they're rehearsals, replays, scripts. And the more they repeat, the more real they feel. But they're not real. They're echoes, sound bouncing off the walls of your own attention. And these echoes feed anxiety, because every time they repeat, the body believes it's in a new conflict. Heart rate rises, breath shortens, muscles tense. Even if you're sitting in a silent room, your nervous system reacts like you're under attack. Buddhism teaches that the mind, left unchecked, turns neutral space into a battlefield. Not because there's an enemy, but because the self has not yet recognized the voice of illusion. The loop begins like this. A thought appears, a judgment, a memory, an imagined confrontation. It feels unresolved, so the mind tries to fix it by playing it again, adding new lines, reworking the moment, defending, attacking, justifying. But this never leads to resolution because it's not a real dialogue, it's noise in an empty room. To detach from this pattern, the first step is recognition. Noticing when the loop begins, feeling the shift in energy, seeing the thought rise like a gust of wind, and realizing you don't have to follow it. It helps to name it. Ah, this is the argument loop. That simple naming breaks the spell. You are no longer inside the argument. You're watching it. And that changes everything. Because the moment you become the witness, the loop starts to lose power. The next step is dropping the need to win. Most internal arguments stay alive because part of the mind is still trying to be right, still trying to deliver the perfect response, still trying to undo what's already done. But there is no victory in imaginary debates, only fatigue. Ask yourself, what am I trying to protect right now? What part of me feels under threat? That question pulls you out of the storyline and into direct awareness. It shifts attention from the script to the sensation, and sensation is always now. It doesn't lie. It doesn't loop. You may notice tightness in the chest, heat in the face, a clenching in the hands. Stay there. Breathe into it. Let it be seen without being acted on. This is how the loop begins to dissolve. Internal arguments also survive through identity. The idea that I am the kind of person who gets hooked by perceived slights or injustice or misunderstanding. The ego steps in and says, "You can't let this go unanswered." But Buddhism teaches there is no solid self to defend, only patterns, only habits, only thoughts pretending to be people. When you step back and see the loop not as yourself but as a habit of thought, you gain the space to choose something else. You can choose silence. You can choose breath. You can choose presence. And presence doesn't argue. Presence listens. In this listening, the echoes start to fade, because they have nothing to bounce off anymore. No reaction, no resistance, just space. You can practice this in real time. The moment the mind begins drafting another internal script, pause. Notice the urge to finish the scene, and instead of engaging, ask, is this helping or hurting? That question brings clarity. It shines a light on the cost of this habit, not just mental, but physical, emotional, spiritual. Because every minute spent inside an imaginary conflict is a minute pulled away from real life, from connection, from rest, from peace. Buddhism invites us to step out of the empty room, to stop talking to ghosts, to stop rehearsing what doesn't need to be said. You do not need to win an argument that never happened. You do not need to explain yourself to a thought. You do not need to keep answering the voice that only exists because you're listening. The echo will keep bouncing until silence is chosen, and silence is not weakness. It is power. It is maturity. It is the moment the mind no longer needs to prove anything. In meditation, this can be practiced gently. When a scene starts to form, When someone's face appears and your inner voice begins the monologue, simply return to the breath. Let the scene dissolve. Let the face fade. Let the voice pass. You are not rejecting the experience. You are releasing your grip on it. Over time, the brain begins to learn. Not every thought needs to be followed. Not every disagreement needs a response. Not every loop needs another round. This breaks the cycle. And in the space that remains, peace has room to enter, not because the world changed, but because you stopped arguing with it inside your mind. You stopped rehearsing pain that hasn't come. You stopped explaining yourself to people who aren't even in the room. And you came back. To the breath, to the moment, to the quiet, solid truth that no echo can shake. This is how the room becomes still again. Not because the voices stopped, but because you stopped answering them. And in that silence, life speaks again. And once the echoes fade, once you stop feeding the loop of imaginary conversations, a deeper question begins to emerge. If the voices in the mind are not real, if the arguments are just patterns, then what remains? Who is it that hears the thought but doesn't believe it? Who sees the storm but doesn't get swept away? That quiet presence, that still clarity, it's been there all along. And this next teaching brings us into that space. Not to think more clearly, but to see more deeply. To step back and notice not just the worry, but the one who's watching it. The foundation of Buddhist insight lies in this simple, powerful shift. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices them. Thoughts arise and pass like clouds in the sky. But the sky does not chase the clouds. It holds them, sees them, lets them go. And that sky-like awareness is what this practice returns you to. Worry, when believed, pulls you into its world. It creates urgency. It demands reaction. But worry can only control you when it convinces you that you are it. That the voice of fear is your voice. That the tension in the body is your identity. That the story must be resolved before peace can return. But that's the illusion. When you pause and begin to observe the one who is worrying, something subtle changes. You stop identifying with the storm. You start seeing it from the shore. The thoughts may still move. The body may still feel tension, but you are no longer inside the thought. You are watching the thinker. This space, this gap between the observer and the thought, is where true freedom begins. It's not about controlling the thought. It's about stepping behind it, watching it rise, watching it fall, like watching a character on a stage, knowing you're sitting in the audience. In meditation, this practice is central. It begins with noticing the breath, then the thoughts that arise. But instead of following them, you label them gently, thinking. Then you return. The mind tries again, planning, judging, worrying. And again, you return. Over time, you begin to see clearly. Thoughts come and go, but awareness stays. The watcher is constant, and that constancy becomes your anchor. This doesn't mean becoming detached from life. It means becoming detached from the false self created by thought, the self that is always afraid, always explaining, always needing something more before it can rest. The watcher doesn't need that. The watcher doesn't need answers. It just sees. And in that seeing, anxiety begins to lose its grip, because the part of you that worries is no longer running the show. When you get lost in worry, The thought feels true. It feels urgent. But when you observe the one worrying, you begin to question it, not with doubt, but with distance. You see how often the same fear returns, dressed in different clothes. You see how often the mind uses the same language, the same tone, the same tricks. And instead of falling for it, you just watch. This is the heart of mindfulness, not controlling what arises, but changing your relationship to what arises, from identification to observation, from I am worried to I see worry, from I am afraid to fear is present. This small shift changes everything because it gives you space, and in that space you can breathe again. The more you watch, the more you realize thoughts don't need your agreement to appear. They'll come anyway. But without your belief, they become like background noise, noticed but not followed. Some people fear this detachment means losing their sense of self. But the opposite is true. You don't become less, you become more real. Because the self created by thought is not who you are. It's a mask, a construction, and once the watcher is seen clearly, the mask loses importance. You begin to experience life from a place that isn't always reacting, defending, proving. You begin to meet emotions with clarity. You begin to meet challenges with softness. And you begin to meet yourself, not the thought-based version, but the one who sees everything without needing to be anything. This watcher is not cold, it's not indifferent, it's deeply compassionate, because it doesn't reject any part of experience. It sees worry, it sees fear, it sees joy. It holds it all without preference. And in that seeing, healing begins. This is how anxiety loses its engine, not by elimination, but by observation. The moment you stop fueling it with belief, the moment you stop acting from it, it begins to fade. This doesn't happen overnight. The mind is persistent. It will try to pull you back into the role. It will say, "This is important. You need to worry about this." But now you have a new tool, not to argue, not to resist, just to watch. And as you watch, the drama loses intensity. The urgency quiets. The silence underneath becomes louder than the story on top. This is presence. This is your nature. And it was never far away. Every time you sit and notice and return, the watcher becomes clearer, stronger, quieter, more trustworthy. You begin to trust yourself, not the thought self, but the observing presence that was never anxious, never confused, never afraid. Because that presence is not wounded, it's not reactive, it's simply here, always. And it's enough. So the next time worry rises, don't follow, turn and look. Not at the thought, at the one who sees it. Stay there. That's where the real peace lives. Not in the mind's next answer, but in the space where no answer is needed, because the one who watches is already free. And now that the watcher is seen clearly, that silent presence behind all thoughts, the next question is not what to understand, but how to stay rooted there. Because even after awareness expands, the pull of the mind remains. It keeps trying to solve, to analyze, to explain the silence instead of resting in it. This next teaching brings a different tool, not to fix the mind, but to slow it down, not to understand more, but to loosen the grip. We now turn to the quiet rhythm of repetition, a chant, a mantra, not to reach a goal, but to free the space between thoughts. Repetition is often misunderstood, People think it's meant to create magic or manifest outcomes or give the illusion of control. But in Buddhist tradition, the purpose of chanting is not to escape reality. It's to meet it, again and again, without resistance. Mantra is not about the words. It's about what happens to the mind when the words no longer matter. Most suffering begins in analysis. The mind gets stuck in loops. It tries to compare, predict, interpret, fix. Even after spiritual insights arise, the mind wants to understand them fully. But some truths aren't meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be lived through surrender. That's where mantra enters. A mantra, when used with presence and rhythm, bypasses the analytical layers of the mind. It doesn't argue with thoughts. It doesn't try to cancel them. It just keeps going, steady, grounded, simple. And as it continues, the mind begins to slow. The overactive circuits settle. The space between thoughts grows wider. This is not hypnotic. It's liberating, because it breaks the pattern of needing everything to make sense. It breaks the loop of "what does this mean?" and replaces it with a rhythm that asks nothing from you, except presence. Mantra practice can be done with Sanskrit phrases, English words, or even simple sounds. The content doesn't matter as much as the intention. What matters is the willingness to repeat, not for reward, but for release. You might chant quietly under your breath. You might say a single word, again and again. Peace, still, here. You might let the sound fade into the breath. Or you might hum softly, letting vibration carry the awareness deeper into the body. However it's done, the goal remains the same. No goal. The paradox of chanting is that its power comes not from effort, but from letting go. It gives the mind something soft to hold, so it can stop gripping everything else. It becomes a thread that keeps you anchored while your thoughts begin to dissolve. And in that dissolving, anxiety softens. Because so much of anxiety comes from needing to figure it out. Repetition short-circuits that habit. It says, there's nothing to figure out. Just return to the rhythm. And in returning, again and again, the nervous system recalibrates. This doesn't mean the thoughts disappear. It means they lose authority. They become background instead of command. The chant becomes foreground. The presence becomes the frame. Mantra is not escape. It's embodiment. The words are not a spell. They're a doorway. And the more you walk through, the less urgent everything becomes. There's a kind of relief that comes from chanting without expectation. It's different from meditation that seeks peace. It's more forgiving, more accessible. It doesn't matter if the mind wanders. The chant is always waiting. You just return. The return is the practice. The power of mantra also lives in the breath. When chant is linked to breath, the body begins to lead. The mind, which usually dominates, learns to follow. This reversal is healing. The body's pace is slower, more natural. When the breath guides the repetition, the system relaxes. You don't need to believe in the chant. You don't need to know what it means. You only need to feel its rhythm. The mind thinks in complexity, but healing often comes through simplicity. This is why monks chant daily, not to earn merit, but to quiet the storm, not to control outcomes, but to step outside of them. Repetition isn't boring when it's alive. It becomes sacred when it's met with attention. And even if the words feel empty at first, their shape becomes a container, a place for the mind to rest without being asked to perform. The deeper benefit is what it rewires. Each time you choose repetition over reaction, each time you return instead of analyze, the mind learns a new pattern. That returning is enough, that staying is enough, that you don't need to solve to be at peace. In a world that values constant stimulation, constant achievement, constant explanation, chanting offers a different message. Just stay here, just breathe, just return. And slowly, something shifts. The background noise fades. The stories lose their sharpness. The fears lose their voice. Because there's no room left for them in the rhythm. Repetition becomes presence. Presence becomes peace. This doesn't mean your life changes instantly. It means your relationship to it does. You no longer need every answer. You no longer need to control every turn. You trust the rhythm. You trust the breath. You trust the chant, even when you don't understand why. This is what loosens the grip of obsessive thought. Not a breakthrough, but a surrender. Not a plan, but a practice. A willingness to return without demanding results. Over time, mantra becomes a companion, not to fill silence, but to deepen it, not to push emotion away, but to carry it gently. It reminds the mind that it's okay to let go. That stillness doesn't mean nothing's happening. That peace doesn't mean the work is done. It means it's being done from a different place. From inside the breath, from inside the heart, from inside the space that doesn't need to be filled. So when the thoughts begin to race again, when the spiral starts to tighten, meet it with a whisper, a chant, a phrase. Nothing magical, just steady, just kind, and return, not to control, but to remember. That presence doesn't need solving, it only needs repeating. And in that repetition, the mind finds its rest. And as the rhythm of repetition softens the grip of thought, as the chant carries the mind past analysis and into presence, another truth begins to reveal itself. Worry is not just a thought pattern. It's energy, raw, restless, often misdirected energy. And this next teaching shows what becomes possible when that energy is not suppressed, not resisted, but redirected. Because energy is neutral, it only becomes suffering when poured into fear. But when it's fed into devotion, ritual, and presence, it becomes something else entirely, a fire that purifies instead of burns. Worry is exhausting, not because it's powerful, but because it's constant. It keeps the mind spinning, the body tense, the heart closed. But underneath all of that movement is fuel, life force, focus, intensity. And when that intensity is shifted into presence, into sacred attention, into conscious offering, something extraordinary begins to happen. The same flame that once fueled fear begins to light the path forward. Buddhism doesn't tell you to get rid of energy. It teaches you to transmute it. That means transforming the nature of your inner fire, not by putting it out, but by changing what you feed it. Worry feeds on uncertainty. It grows when the mind tries to predict or control. Devotion, however, is the opposite. It is the act of offering your full presence to something bigger than your personal anxiety. It doesn't need certainty. It only needs sincerity. Devotion is not tied to religion. It's tied to attention. You can be devotional toward your breath, your body, your environment, your morning tea. The power of devotion comes from where you place your energy and how fully you offer it. The anxious mind is obsessed with outcomes. Devotion doesn't ask for results. It gives without grasping. That's why it heals, because it retrains the nervous system to live in offering instead of demand. One of the most powerful ways to channel anxious energy is through sacred ritual. Not because ritual changes the outside world, but because it changes your relationship with the inner world. It gives your attention something steady to return to. A bowl of water, a lit candle, a bow, a phrase, a gesture. Ritual becomes a container, a space where scattered energy can rest. The difference between ritual and routine is intention. When you make tea with reverence, it becomes devotion. When you sit down with care, it becomes an offering. When you move with awareness, the action itself becomes a prayer. This is how anxious energy begins to change form. It becomes warmth instead of panic, precision instead of paralysis. It begins to serve something rather than spiral into itself. Devotional energy grounds you. It places your awareness into the act, not the outcome. That's where anxiety loses its grip, when the present moment becomes more important than the result. Devotion also opens the heart, because you're no longer pouring energy into what if. You're pouring it into I'm here. And the more you pour, the more the flame shifts from fear to presence. You can make a ritual out of anything. Lighting incense in the morning, speaking a phrase before meals, sitting with your hand on your heart for one full breath before a task. These are not performances, they are practices, anchoring points for the energy that used to scatter across dozens of anxious thoughts. In this way, even the act of feeling anxious becomes part of your devotion. Not something to avoid, but something to meet, to offer, to hold. Instead of thinking, I'm nervous, I need to get rid of this, you shift to, here is my energy, how can I offer it well? And what you'll find is that every moment becomes more sacred, not because it changes, but because you are fully there. The Buddha often spoke of wise effort, not pushing, not striving, but applying energy in a skillful way, feeding the right flame. This is the heart of the practice, because worry is effort without direction. Devotion is effort with heart. You don't need to have a spiritual altar. Your breath is enough. Your cup of water is enough. Your quiet walk at dusk is enough. The key is to show up to the moment as if it matters, not to impress, not to prove, but to feel, to be where your hands are, to be where your feet are, to be in your body instead of your projections. The more you live like this, the more the anxious mind begins to fade, not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer useful. This is not fantasy, it's retraining. Energy, once redirected, creates new rhythms. The nervous system begins to expect presence, not panic. It begins to anticipate peace, not chaos. And slowly, your life fills with new fires, not destructive, illuminating. Fires that burn away the need to understand everything. Fires that warm the heart instead of overheating the mind. This is the quiet revolution of daily devotion. The way a simple gesture, repeated with care, becomes more healing than any complex plan. The way a humble ritual becomes more transformative than any theory. It doesn't matter what you choose, chanting, tea-making, sweeping, planting, silence. What matters is how you give yourself to it. This is what devotion means, giving yourself to the now, giving your energy not to fear, but to love, to stillness, to service, to truth. You stop feeding the fire of what might go wrong. You start feeding the flame of what's right in front of you, and in doing so, you begin to trust yourself again, not because you figured it all out, but because you showed up over and over with heart. This is how anxiety is transformed, not through resistance, but through sacred redirection. Let the energy move, but let it move into presence. Let the fire burn, but let it burn in a way that lights your way forward, because the flame will always be there. And now you've learned to choose what you feed it. And once anxious energy is redirected, once it is fed into ritual, into devotion, into meaningful presence, something powerful becomes possible. The thoughts that once demanded attention begin to feel less urgent. They still come, but they don't grip the same way. They drift in, expecting you to chase them. But now you don't. This next teaching begins here, with a quiet rebellion. Not a war against worry, but a choice to stop fueling it, to let the engine stall. This is the art of thought starvation, not through violence, not through suppression, but through gentle, steady non-participation. Worry thrives on one thing: your attention. It doesn't survive because it's true. It survives because it's fed. Every time it's analyzed, explained, fixed, or resisted, it grows. But when it's ignored, not angrily, not carelessly, but with clarity, it begins to fade. This is not neglect in the way people usually think of it. It's not cold. It's not shutting down. It's a skillful kind of silence. A deliberate act of choosing not to engage with every voice that rises in your mind. The first step is recognizing the pattern. Worry often begins with a subtle signal, a discomfort in the stomach, a racing of thought, a mental itch. The usual instinct is to react, to solve. But here, the practice begins with noticing and doing nothing. Noticing the thought is there and refusing to enter its world. This refusal is not harsh. It's soft, like letting a phone ring without answering. The phone may ring louder, it may flash, but you don't pick it up. Eventually, it stops ringing. That's what happens with the mind when you stop giving it the feedback it wants. It gets quiet, not out of defeat, but because you're no longer playing. This is different from distraction. Distraction moves your energy away from the thought. Starvation keeps the energy inside, but untouched, present, but not involved. It helps to anchor your awareness somewhere else. The breath, the feet, the sounds around you. You're not pushing the thought away, you're just not moving toward it. Each time the thought appears and you choose not to engage, it loses a little more strength. The roots loosen, the repetition weakens, and the nervous system begins to recalibrate. Worry needs your participation to stay alive. It needs you to respond, to agree, to argue. When you stop doing that, the cycle begins to break. You might feel discomfort in the beginning. Silence can feel awkward. Not solving might feel unsafe. But this discomfort isn't danger. It's detox. It's the system adjusting to a new rhythm, one where not every thought gets a stage. There's a story in Zen about a student asking the master how to deal with unwanted thoughts. The master says, "Don't invite them in for tea." That's the practice. The door opens. You see the thought, but you don't let it move in. You let it pass. And it will pass. Thoughts are not solid. They're not permanent. They don't even finish forming if you don't feed them. You'll start to notice this. A worry begins, but when it gets no response, it stalls. It hangs awkwardly in the air and dissolves. Not because you defeated it, but because you starved it of your belief. This practice takes consistency. The mind is clever. It will try new angles, new hooks. But as you return to the breath, to the body, to the now, over and over, the old paths wear down. And this is where the freedom begins to grow. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady. You begin to walk through life without dragging every thought behind you. You begin to feel space where there used to be loops. It's important to know that starving a thought is not suppression. Suppression is forceful. Starvation is neutral. Suppression pushes down. Starvation steps back. And in stepping back, you reclaim your attention. You begin to live from a deeper place, not reaction, but presence. You begin to feel the difference between thought and awareness. One spins, the other watches. The more time you spend as the watcher, the less need there is to feed the thinker. This practice also builds trust. Trust that you don't need to follow every anxious narrative to stay safe. Trust that clarity doesn't come from mental spinning, it comes from silence. This silence isn't empty, it's restorative. It's where the nervous system unwinds, where the breath lengthens, where decisions become cleaner, where life slows down. Thoughts will still come. That's not the problem. The practice isn't about never thinking. It's about no longer believing that every thought deserves a seat at your table. This especially applies to old mental loops, the kind that show up every day, the what-ifs, the why did I-s, the future rehearsals, the mental replay of a mistake. Each one is a story with the same cast, the same plot, the same ending. And every time it starts, you can make a new choice. Let it talk. Don't reply. Let it pass. Don't follow. Let it echo. Don't lean in. This is not passivity. It's mastery. You're not controlled by the thought. You're not arguing with it. You're simply not giving it what it needs to survive. Over time, the thought loop begins to wither, like a fire that's been left with no more wood. It flickers, it fades, it goes out. And in that quiet, something else begins to grow. Real presence. Not performance, not effort, just being. That's the gift of this practice. It gives you back your energy. The energy that used to be poured into worrying, into spinning, into solving problems that weren't even real yet. Now, that energy is yours again, for breathing, for noticing, for living. The practice is simple. Let the thought come, let the thought go, and in between, don't feed it. This is how you become free, not by fighting, but by no longer participating in the performance of fear. That's the art of thought starvation, and it leads you here to peace that no thought can interrupt. And once the mental loop begins to fade, once the thoughts are no longer being fed, something softer begins to surface. A quiet, almost hidden presence behind the worry. It's not a monster. It's not the enemy. It's a small voice, often afraid, vulnerable, childlike. This is where the next teaching leads us, not toward logic, but toward kindness, not into analysis, but into connection. Because the one who worries is not a failure to be fixed, but a younger self asking for care. And Buddhist compassion teaches us not to fight that voice, but to hold it, to speak to it the way we would to a child who never learned safety. Worry, at its root, is a protective response. It's the mind's way of saying, I don't feel safe. It's trying to prevent pain, predict problems, protect what matters. But when that protective energy goes unacknowledged or gets judged, it grows louder. Not because it's strong, but because it's scared. And if we look closely, most worry doesn't come from the adult self. It comes from the part of us that still feels small, the part that once didn't get what it needed: reassurance, support, softness, safety. The child within who learned that the world could change in an instant and believed they had to think ahead or be perfect to avoid hurt. This is not weakness. It's a leftover survival strategy. And Buddhist compassion asks us to stop running from that part of ourselves and start listening. When anxiety rises, when the worry starts again, instead of thinking, "What's wrong with me?" try, "Who in me is speaking?" This changes the energy completely. It brings presence into the places that once only knew pressure. It slows the momentum of panic by offering warmth instead of judgment. Think of it like sitting with a scared child. If that child were shaking, would you yell? Would you try to reason them into calmness? No. You'd kneel. You'd soften your voice. You'd say, "I'm here. You're safe. We don't need to fix everything right now." This is how we begin to speak to our own minds, with kindness, with patience, not to dismiss the worry, but to comfort the part of us that carries it. This is not about becoming childish. It's about meeting the childlike part of the psyche that never received gentleness in moments of fear. You can practice this in real time. When worry appears, place a hand on your chest or stomach, not to fix, just to feel. Then say softly, either aloud or in your mind, "I hear you. You're trying to help, but it's okay to rest now." Sometimes it helps to give this part of yourself a name, not to separate, but to personalize. "Hey, little one. I know it feels scary, but I've got you now." This inner dialogue isn't foolish, it's deeply healing, because so often the worried voice simply wants to be acknowledged. The mind will resist this at first. It's used to being dismissed or controlled, but with practice, the worried part begins to trust the presence of your compassion. It begins to quiet, not because it was silenced, but because it was soothed. This is what makes Buddhist compassion different from mere self-help. It doesn't ask you to push past the worry. It asks you to bow to it, to see it as something that once tried to keep you alive, and in that recognition, to offer it something new, safety through presence. No part of the self should be exiled, not the fear, not the tension, not the doubt. Every part has a voice, and every voice calms down when it feels heard. You may start to notice that worry always arises in the same patterns. When you feel uncertain, when you're tired, when you're about to do something unfamiliar. These aren't flaws, they're invitations to bring compassion inward. You don't need to become your own therapist. You just need to become your own friend. To sit with yourself the way a gentle parent would, with openness and care. There are moments when anxiety seems too big to hold. In those moments, remember, You're not trying to fix the fear. You're trying to stay with the one who feels it. This distinction changes everything. It turns struggle into connection. It turns reactivity into calm. Compassion doesn't mean the fear goes away instantly. It means you're no longer adding resistance to it. And that lack of resistance creates space. And space is where peace enters. Some people think inner compassion is indulgent, that if you're too soft with yourself, you'll stop growing. But that's a myth born from harshness. Growth happens best in environments of safety, not pressure, not perfection, safety. When the mind feels safe, it opens. When the heart feels safe, it heals. And when the inner child feels safe, it stops needing to scream. You don't need perfect words. You only need your presence. That's what the worried voice is looking for. Not advice, not solutions, just the feeling that someone is finally staying. This staying becomes a ritual, a quiet checking in. How are you feeling? What do you need? I'm with you. You do this not once, but again and again, until the part of you that used to panic begins to expect comfort instead of criticism. This is the long path of inner repair, and it's sacred. Because when compassion becomes your default response to fear, the nervous system changes. It stops bracing. It starts breathing. And over time, worry begins to feel less like a threat and more like a signal to slow down, to check in, to come back to breath, back to heart, back to the one inside who has waited so long to be held. This is how you stop fighting the mind, by loving it, by showing it what it never knew was possible, that even fear deserves kindness. Even the panicked thoughts, even the shaky voice, even the worst-case scenario running wild in your head. Because behind all of it is someone who wants to feel safe. And now you know how to answer them. Not with perfection, but with presence. Not with strategy, but with softness. Because presence is what heals, and softness is what stays. And once compassion reaches the part of us that worries, once the inner child is met, not with judgment, but with gentle care, another pattern begins to show itself, quietly hidden beneath almost every anxious thought. A concept so deeply rooted in the mind that most never question it. Time. Not the kind on a clock, but the kind that creates stories, the kind that builds fear around what might come next. The mind's addiction to later, and this next teaching begins there. Not with a prediction, but with a realization. That time is not the enemy, but believing in future catastrophe as real is the birthplace of worry. That what we call the future is not a place, it's a thought. Worry feeds on the idea that something is coming, something unknown, uncontrollable, threatening. The mind doesn't need proof, it only needs possibility. And time gives it that possibility. Time gives it a canvas to paint fear on, not with facts, but with projections. And because those projections feel vivid, the body reacts as if they're real. But the future doesn't exist, not in the way the worried mind believes. There is no future event currently happening. There are no real catastrophes unfolding in this moment. What exists are thoughts about them, and Buddhist insight goes straight to the root. Those thoughts are not reality. They are a function of time as a mental habit. Time, when misunderstood, is the background of all mental suffering. It splits experience. It creates a past that clings, a future that haunts, and a present that is barely noticed. Worry can only live in this fracture, because in the pure present there is no space for imaginary outcomes. There is only what is. To see this clearly, notice where worry begins. It doesn't start in the breath. It starts in a thought about something not here. A meeting tomorrow, a conversation next week, a fear about how something might go. That thought creates an image, the body responds, and the spiral begins. But if the thought is dropped, even for a moment, everything calms. Not because the external world changed, but because the mind returned to what's real. This breath, this body, this moment. The idea of future is powerful because it feels useful. The mind says, if I prepare now, I'll be safe later. But that logic quickly becomes obsession, and obsession disconnects you from the only place where real action and real peace can happen now. Buddhist practice doesn't ask you to ignore time. It asks you to see through it, to realize that tomorrow is a mental construction, a concept, not a destination, and that most fear is just the mind rehearsing a reality that hasn't arrived. The practice begins by noticing how often the mind moves toward later, how often it drifts into timelines. What if it doesn't work out? What if they say this? What if I fail? Each one is a time-based projection. None of them are happening. This doesn't mean become careless. It means become clear. Planning can still happen, but planning is different from worrying. Planning uses the present. Worry tries to live in the future. Only one is real. To begin dissolving time as a source of anxiety, return to the body. The body never lives in a concept. It lives in now. The breath is now. The heartbeat is now. The sounds around you are now. Let awareness settle into these anchors. Each time a fear arises, ask, is this happening now? Or is this a thought about what might happen? This question pulls the mind back into the present. It breaks the trance of what if, and the more often you ask it, the more clearly you see how rarely your worries are rooted in reality. Presence is not a luxury, it's medicine. It's the only state where the nervous system can relax, because it's the only place where the mind is no longer predicting danger. In presence, there's no future to prepare for. There's only now to feel, to respond to live inside. This can be practiced throughout the day. Notice when time appears as stress, a deadline, a delay, a memory, a plan. Feel how each one shifts your body. Then pause, breathe, and remind yourself, this too is a thought. Even clocks are concepts. They measure something, yes, but they don't contain it. No second has ever been touched. No tomorrow has ever arrived. And yet, most people live as if they're already in it. That's the core of the illusion. The future is only alive when believed. It's only dangerous when treated as more real than now. And once this is seen, deeply seen, worry begins to collapse, because it has no home, no timeline to live inside, just passing thoughts in a space that no longer clings to them. Meditation becomes a training ground for this realization. Each time you sit, you're not just quieting the mind, you're stepping out of the artificial structure of time. You're entering the only place where fear can't survive, direct awareness. This isn't detachment. It's return. Returning to what was never broken. Returning to the wholeness that exists only here. Returning to the self that doesn't rush toward later, but rests in now. You'll still plan, you'll still prepare, but you'll do it without being owned by time. You'll think without being trapped in the thought. This is freedom, because once you see time as a thought, you no longer need to fear what's coming. Nothing is coming, only thinking, and thinking can be watched. Worry can be softened. Fear can be seen for what it is, a ripple on the surface of stillness. That stillness is who you are underneath the timeline, not the one running toward the future, but the one sitting in presence, untouched by the clock. That presence doesn't prepare, it responds. It doesn't panic, it sees. And in that seeing, time dissolves. And when time dissolves, so does worry. And once the illusion of time fades, once the future is seen for what it really is, just thought, what we're left with is this moment. And this moment, raw and unfiltered, is often not what we expected. Things break, plans fail, dreams shift. Sometimes what's left after we've stopped worrying isn't peace, it's pieces. But this next teaching offers a different lens, a truth born from silence, not strategy. That what breaks isn't always the end of the story. In Buddhism, it might be the beginning. This is the Dharma of broken things. The lesson that freedom doesn't only live in perfection, but often waits quietly inside the pieces we didn't plan to hold. In the West, failure is often seen as a problem to be solved, a sign of something gone wrong. But Zen holds a deeper understanding. In the breaking of form, something else appears. In the loss of control, space is made for what cannot be designed. When the bowl cracks, light gets in. When the temple burns, the sky becomes visible. There is a Zen story of a student who arrives at the monastery after losing everything, his job, his home, his reputation. He comes in shame, looking for redemption. The teacher doesn't offer comfort. He simply points to the broken stones outside and says, "There is no need to rebuild, just sit where it fell." This is the first truth. Brokenness isn't a mistake. It's a condition of life. The ego is what struggles with it. The ego wants clean lines, fixed narratives, a timeline that makes sense. But the Dharma, the truth of how things actually are, flows differently. When something breaks, it reveals its hidden structure. The inside becomes visible. The mask comes off. And while the world might see it as damage, the practice is to see it as invitation. Invitation to pause, invitation to feel, invitation to meet the part of ourselves that only speaks when silence arrives. Setbacks, whether in relationships, in plans, in identity, are not punishments. They're doorways. They tear the map we've been clinging to and show us that we were never truly in control. This isn't said to dismiss pain. Pain is real. Grief is real. But suffering multiplies when we believe it means something went wrong. Sometimes pain is just the body adjusting to truth. Sometimes grief is the heart releasing an illusion it needed to grow past. What's broken cannot be unbroken, but it can be honored, and that honoring turns failure into wisdom. Buddhism teaches that impermanence is not just an idea, it's a doorway to awakening. When something we love falls apart, it's not the loss that transforms us, it's what we see in the space that follows. And often what we see is our own clinging to how it should have been, to who we thought we were, to what we thought we needed to be whole. But the moment the clinging breaks, we fall, not down, but inward. And that's where the real journey begins. The journey into what remains when there's nothing left to prove. Into the self that doesn't need repair. Into the breath that was always enough. Failure, seen clearly, is not the opposite of progress. It is the removal of illusion, a sacred undoing. And within that undoing, something real can finally take root. There's another Zen teaching. Barns burnt down, now I can see the moon. What's beautiful about this is its simplicity. The teacher doesn't say the barn shouldn't have burned. He doesn't say it was good or bad. He simply points to what became visible in its absence. This is the shift from asking, why did this happen, to what is now possible, from how do I fix it, to what truth does this reveal? These questions don't dismiss the loss. They honor it. They let the pieces fall where they will, and then they breathe into that space, not to rebuild the old, but to notice what never needed walls in the first place. When the ego breaks, there is grief, but there is also grace, because now the heart has space to open, the mind has space to quiet, the spirit has space to stretch. Sometimes what we fear most, embarrassment, collapse, failure, is what clears the path to something deeper, something more honest than we would have chosen on our own. In this way, setbacks become sacred, not through force, through surrender, through saying, yes, this is broken, and still, I am here. From that place, the practice isn't to rebuild the old life. It's to meet the new one with eyes that no longer need guarantees. The beauty of brokenness in Zen is that it reveals the empty nature of things. Nothing can stay as it is. Nothing should. Because it's in the change, in the falling apart, that we see clearly what doesn't change. The breath, the awareness, the quiet watcher who was there before the success and remains after the fall. This is the true self, not the one that wins, but the one that watches. And when you live from that place, even brokenness becomes a kind of liberation. Not because it feels good, but because it frees you from needing to feel good all the time. It frees you from the lie that you must always hold it together. It frees you from the false story that only whole things have value. Sometimes the crack is not the flaw, it's the teaching. Sometimes the temple burns so that you stop worshipping what was never sacred to begin with. And in the ashes, something else waits. Stillness, simplicity, space, and the breath that reminds you you were never the thing that broke. You were always the awareness watching it break. And now you are the awareness witnessing what grows in its place. And once the dust of what has broken settles, once the stories fall away and only presence remains, another illusion begins to lose its hold. The belief that worry is useful, that anxiety is a kind of tool, that through mental effort, constant rehearsal, or emotional tension, we somehow steer the world away from collapse. This is the next truth that needs to be seen. Because beneath every spiral of fear, there's often a quiet conviction. If I don't worry, something worse will happen. But what if that belief is false? What if the control you think worry gives you is the very thing keeping you from peace? The mind likes control. It finds comfort in plans, systems, expectations. It feels safe when it knows what's next. But life rarely plays by those rules. Life interrupts. It surprises. It moves on its own terms. And when the mind can't predict it, it tightens its grip. It starts spinning stories. What if this? What if that? What should I do? How do I stop this? And it mistakes this spinning for power. This is the core of the illusion, that worry prepares you, that it keeps you sharp, that it helps you stay ready for anything. But look closer. What does worry actually do? It creates tension. It shortens the breath. It floods the body with stress hormones. It fills space that could have been calm with noise that leads nowhere. It doesn't stop the future. It just poisons the present. The Buddha taught that craving causes suffering, not just craving for pleasure, but craving for control. The need to make things go a certain way, to hold outcomes in your hand. And worry is one of the subtlest forms of craving. It's not loud like desire. It's quiet like dread. But it's still an attempt to make life obey the mind. And life doesn't obey. It flows. It rises and falls. It gives and takes. And no amount of mental rehearsal changes that. This is not hopelessness. This is clarity. The clarity that comes when you finally see there is no controller here. No lever in the brain that shifts the world into place. No sentence you can repeat in your head that guarantees safety. No pattern of anxiety that ever actually prevented a crisis. Worry doesn't protect you. It prepares you to feel bad before anything bad even happens. And often, it doesn't happen at all. But the body still suffers. The heart still contracts. The present moment is still sacrificed in the name of an imagined future. And even when something difficult does come, the worry didn't help. Because the clarity needed in real difficulty doesn't come from tension. It comes from stillness. Think about it. When things really fall apart, when someone gets hurt, when life changes fast, do you want a panicked mind or a calm one? Do you want reactivity or presence? Worry doesn't make you strong. It drains the strength you already have. That's why surrender is not weakness. It's the moment you stop feeding a lie. The lie that if you worry enough, if you obsess enough, if you grip the steering wheel hard enough, life will finally behave. But there is no steering wheel. There is only breath. And breath can be trusted far more than fear ever could. In Buddhist practice, surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving over. It means releasing the need to be the center of the story, to make every outcome a reflection of your thinking. It means bowing to the truth that you were never meant to control everything. Because control is a myth. Influence is real. Response is real. Care is real. But control, it's a shadow. It looks like substance, but when you reach for it, it slips through your fingers. This is why the mind returns to worry. It's trying to grip what cannot be held. And when it fails, it doubles down. It thinks, I must not be doing enough. And so it spins faster. But worry is not a lack of effort. It's a misuse of energy. What you can do is show up, stay grounded, Take care of what's in front of you. Speak clearly, move gently, choose wisely. But none of that requires fear. None of it needs tension. In fact, the less fear you carry, the more present you become. And the more present you are, the better your choices will be. This is what replaces the illusion of control, the serenity of surrender. Surrender doesn't mean being passive, it means being available to life, to now, to truth as it unfolds. It means you're no longer trying to force the river, you're learning to swim with it. And that swim begins with trust. Trust not in outcomes, not in guarantees, but in your ability to remain grounded when outcomes shift, to remain kind when plans fall apart, to remain spacious when the unknown arrives. This kind of trust is stronger than control because it doesn't need the world to obey. It only needs you to stay awake. And worry is not wakefulness. It's a dream, a nightmare of what if that pulls you out of the one place you can actually meet life, here. So what happens when you stop believing worry is power? You stop using it. You stop measuring your care by your tension. You stop proving your worth through your stress. You stop bracing for impact in a life that might never hit you the way you feared. And you begin to relax. Not because the world is safe, but because you don't need it to be. You only need to be here, clear, honest, compassionate, present. And presence is what protects you, not from events, but from illusion. From the belief that you must suffer now to prevent suffering later. From the belief that anxiety is noble. From the belief that control is love. None of those things are true. What is true is this: you are already strong enough to meet what comes. You are already wise enough to respond when needed. You are already grounded enough to release what can't be held. And in releasing it, you remember, no controller, no crisis, just life, just breath, just you, finally free to live without gripping. And after surrender dissolves the illusion of control, after the grip loosens and the breath returns, a deeper clarity begins to surface. The mind, left without its usual defenses, still offers up familiar thoughts, worries, doubts, loops, not because danger is near, but because the pattern is old. This is where the next layer of understanding emerges. To see worry not as insight, not as intuition, not as a warning, but as karma, as mental residue, as an echo from the past that doesn't need your belief, only your observation. Karma, in Buddhist psychology, is not a system of punishment and reward. It's not cosmic justice. It's conditioning. It's the way the mind repeats what it's practiced. Worry is one of those patterns, one that gets reinforced not because it's true, but because it's familiar. It has roots in memory, in experience, in trauma, in belief, but it is not prophecy. To see worry as karma is to understand that its presence says more about where you've been than where you're going. It's a ghost, not a guide. It's the echo of past fear, not a signal of new threat. The mind stores everything it experiences. It remembers discomfort. It remembers pain. And it tries to avoid that pain by predicting its return. But the prediction isn't accurate. It's habitual. The body feels a flicker of uncertainty, and the mind fills in the rest with stories learned long ago. This is why worry can arise even when things are going well. The mind isn't reacting to the present. It's replaying its conditioning. the way a muscle spasms after injury, the way a song gets stuck in your head after hearing it too often. That's what karma is in this context: repetition without conscious cause. And this repetition becomes sticky when it's misinterpreted. The moment you believe worry is meaningful, you give it power. The moment you think, if I'm feeling anxious, something must be wrong, you validate the echo. You let the past write the present. But the practice here is different. It's not to reject the thought. It's not to fight it. It's to see it clearly, calmly, without grasping, without judgment, like watching a ripple fade on water. You don't believe the ripple is the ocean, you just let it pass. When worry arises, ask, is this a reflection of the moment, or is it a habit of mind? That question alone can break the trance. It returns you to the seat of the observer, to the part of you that's not caught in karma, but watching it. Because the observer is not conditioned, the observer is aware, and awareness doesn't react, it just sees. This is what makes the Buddhist view so liberating. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not the accumulation of old fears. You are the space in which they appear. When worry is seen this way, it begins to lose its urgency. It still arises, but you no longer need to follow it. You don't need to believe it. You recognize the voice. Ah, yes, the same script, the same tone. But it doesn't pull you under anymore. This shift is powerful. It turns fear into fuel. It turns anxiety into insight. Because now, instead of asking what the worry is trying to say, you ask what it reveals about your conditioning. You ask what karma is showing up to be released. Sometimes it's old fear from childhood. Sometimes it's a cultural story you inherited. Sometimes it's an emotional response that made sense years ago but doesn't belong anymore. Whatever it is, it's not a message, it's a mirror. And that mirror is not a curse. It's an invitation to meet yourself where you are, to hold the echoes with compassion, to break the cycle not by force, but by presence. Every time you see worry without believing it, the karma weakens. The neural pathway gets a little quieter. The body starts to trust the moment instead of fearing the next. And this trust is not naive. It's clear. It knows that danger exists, but not in every thought. It knows that fear is part of life, but not the whole of it. It knows that just because a pattern shows up doesn't mean you need to live inside it. This clarity grows with repetition. The same way worry once repeated itself into your nervous system, awareness now rewrites the rhythm. With breath, with silence, with noticing. Even the way you relate to relapse changes. The old thought comes back, and instead of spiraling, you smile. Oh, you again. And then you return to now, to body, to breath. And the cycle is broken one more time. Seeing worry as karma also deepens compassion for yourself and for others, because you begin to understand we're all acting from our conditioning. We're all carrying echoes. We're all doing the best we can with the patterns we've inherited. That understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps dissolve shame. It helps you meet the worried voice with tenderness instead of rejection. Worry is not the enemy. It's a message from an old part of you that didn't know another way. And now you're learning one. Not by erasing the past, but by no longer feeding it. Not by fighting the echo, but by not becoming the one who repeats it. This is how karma is released, not through avoidance, but through wisdom, through watching again and again without getting pulled back in. The next time worry whispers, pause, listen, smile gently, say, "I know where you come from, but I don't live there anymore." Then return to what's real: the breath, the stillness, the step in front of you, the sound in the room. Karma cannot survive full presence. It dissolves in now, and now is where freedom begins. And once the echo is recognized for what it is, not a truth, but a habit, not a warning, but karma, a new space begins to open, a space that is not filled with interpretation or analysis, but with direct experience. What lives in that space is not thought, it's sensation, awareness, breath. And this is where we now go, not into more understanding, but into interception, into presence that begins before the thought forms, before worry has a shape, before the mind creates the loop. This is the lesson of breath, not as something to calm down after the storm, but as the very place where the storm never starts. Most people think of breathing practice as a way to relax, to recover, to come down after a spike in emotion. And yes, the breath can do that, but it can do far more. When practiced deeply, breath becomes a gatekeeper, a protector of attention, a way to catch the shift from stillness into story before the story even begins. In Buddhism, attention to breath is the foundation for awareness, not because it changes the breath, but because it teaches the mind to stay rooted, to stay embodied, to stay in now. This rooting stops anxiety not by fighting it, but by never giving it a place to grow. Because anxiety is fast, it moves quickly. Thought flashes in, emotion responds, and the body reacts before we even realize it. But breath moves slower. Breath is steady. Breath is always here. And when we train the mind to return to the breath, not after thought, but before it, we create a rhythm that is stronger than the habit of fear. This is not about breathing better, it's about breathing first, bringing attention back to the inhale before the loop begins, placing awareness on the exhale before the story gets traction, noticing the small shift, the tightening in the gut, the shallow breath, the racing of mental images, and returning to the body before it builds. That moment of return is where transformation happens, not through effort, through timing. The sooner you return, the less you need to repair. This is why daily breath practice matters, not to become good at meditating, but to become skilled at noticing, to become sensitive to the micro movements in your inner world. The micro flinches that say, "I'm about to leave the present, I'm about to follow a thought." Breath becomes the anchor. And over time, it becomes a habit, the kind of habit that rewires the nervous system, that says to the body, "We're safe right now." And when the body believes that, the mind doesn't have to take over. Worry is often the mind stepping in where the body was never asked. The breath tells the body, "Stay with me." And when the breath is deep, the mind softens. It doesn't feel the need to jump ahead. You can practice this in small ways throughout your day. Each time a thought begins, pause. Ask yourself, what was my breath doing before that thought appeared? Most times, you'll find the breath was shallow, or paused, or disconnected. Then breathe, not to push the thought away, but to return to where you were before it showed up, to reoccupy your body, to reconnect the mind to its source. This shift, breathing before the thought, doesn't just calm you. It rewrites the whole structure of your attention. It teaches your nervous system that the first response isn't mental, it's physical. It's the exhale, the drop of the shoulders, the awareness of chest rising and falling. And from that place, you make different choices. You respond with presence instead of panic. You catch yourself earlier. You interrupt the spiral when it's a whisper, not a scream. Breathing before thought also reveals how often we live slightly above the body, slightly out of sync, like we're floating an inch above our own experience, waiting for something to go wrong. The breath brings us back down. It doesn't think. It feels. It returns us to the weight of feet on the ground, air in the lungs, gravity in the spine. And that groundedness is what anxiety cannot compete with. Because anxiety needs disconnection to thrive. It needs the mind to wander ahead, the body to feel forgotten, the breath to be skipped. When you breathe fully, you become present. And presence is not a theory. It's a sensation, a temperature, a pressure, a sound, a heartbeat, a now. When you train yourself to notice the breath at the first flicker of mental tension, you start seeing how fast the loop begins and how quickly it can dissolve. One breath is often enough. One full inhale, one conscious exhale. The thought may still be there, but the urgency is gone. This doesn't mean anxiety disappears forever. It means you no longer need to follow it. You meet it earlier, you meet it softer, you meet it from the body, not from the mind. And the body is wiser than we give it credit for. The body doesn't create stories. It creates signals. Signals we can learn to read, not as threats, but as reminders to return. Return to breath. Return to here. Return to the moment before you became a mind, because that moment is always available. It's always just one breath away, and the more you live from that place, the less energy you spend recovering. The less often you need to fix what never had to fall apart. You stop living in repair. You start living in rhythm. A rhythm that begins where thought ends. A rhythm that says, presence lives in breath. Peace begins before the sentence does. So breathe now, not to calm down, to wake up, not to fix, to return. To interrupt the story before it becomes a world you have to survive, because there is no danger here. Only air, only life, only this moment, waiting to be filled with nothing but your full attention. And once the breath has returned, before the thoughts take shape, before the spiral even begins, something unexpected starts to appear. A quiet, a gap, a space so open that at first the mind doesn't trust it. A space that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't suggest what's next, doesn't fill itself with analysis, with fixing, with preparing. This space is emptiness, not the emptiness of loss, the emptiness of peace, the kind of emptiness that only appears when every habit of concern finally drops. And this next teaching is about what it means to live from there, not full of tension, but free of it, not weighed down by responsibility to feel anxious, but uplifted by the realization that worry isn't necessary, that it's not only okay to have nothing to worry about, it's awakening. In most cultures, emptiness is feared. It's seen as a problem, a void, a lack, something to fill. So we fill it with thoughts, with busyness, with distraction, with endless checking and correcting. But in Buddhist philosophy, emptiness is not something missing. It's something revealed. It's the space that remains when the noise quiets, when the self steps aside, when the craving to control, to protect, to constantly do falls away. This is what makes it a gift. Worry is the habit of trying to fill that space. It says, I must stay alert, I must stay responsible, I must keep caring or things will fall apart. But there's a misunderstanding here. Worry is not care. Worry is attachment pretending to be care. It's fear in disguise. It's the belief that by carrying concern, we carry control. And what this teaching invites is the letting go of that belief. The realization that care can exist without anxiety, that awareness can be present without tension, that deep peace is not something earned through stress, it's something uncovered through emptiness. This doesn't mean you stop showing up for life. It means you stop bringing the burden of constant mental activity with you. It means you learn to trust stillness, not as an accident, but as a way of being. Many people carry a quiet guilt when they're not worrying, as if being calm means they've become lazy, detached, indifferent. But that guilt is just another loop, another way the mind stays busy, another form of inner noise that says, surely I should be doing more. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if real strength is found in stillness? What if real clarity comes from having space around your thoughts? What if the absence of concern isn't a sign that you're missing something, but that you're finally touching something deeper? This is the radical turn, realizing that the mind does not need to be busy to be wise. That concern is not a requirement for compassion. That stillness is not disengagement. It's intimacy without interference. And the path to this stillness is not paved with more thinking. It's paved with release. One thought at a time, one habit at a time, one silent breath at a time. When you begin to trust emptiness, you begin to see how much suffering comes from filling space unnecessarily. How often we chase purpose through anxiety. How often we define our value by how worried we are. How often we use mental noise to avoid the vulnerability of being quiet. But emptiness is not numb. It's sensitive. It feels everything, but it holds nothing. It doesn't cling, it doesn't compare, it doesn't replay. It receives, and it lets go. The more you rest in this, the more you realize that the world doesn't fall apart just because you stop trying to hold it up with your mind. Life keeps moving, events unfold, emotions rise and fall, and you remain present, without commentary, without correction, without the illusion that your concern was ever holding the sky in place. This is where true peace begins. When you no longer measure safety by how much you worry. When you stop using anxiety as a compass. When you realize that not having anything to worry about is not only rare, it's sacred. Because that moment, that emptiness, is the doorway to direct experience, not the filtered version, not the story version, but the breath, the sound, the texture of being alive without needing to interpret it. That's what emptiness gives back. Unfiltered presence. Life before the lens of fear. Reality without the voiceover. And in that state, even responsibility feels different. You still act, you still care, but the energy comes from clarity, not tension, from simplicity, not stress. You're not always scanning for what might go wrong. You're resting in what is. You're not rehearsing conversations that haven't happened. You're meeting the ones that are. You're not looping old regrets. You're feeling the ground under your feet. This isn't avoidance, it's arrival. You are arriving in your life. And there's room now. Room for beauty, for breath, for connection that isn't driven by fixing or performing. Just presence, just awareness, just enough. This is what makes emptiness a gift. It removes everything that was never essential. It leaves you with the truth that you are already whole, already here, already capable of living without carrying the entire world inside your head. And when worry tries to return, and it will, you meet it with silence, not as an enemy, not even as a mistake, just as a reminder that peace is not the result of solving everything. It's the result of needing nothing to solve. This is the final freedom, having nothing to prove, nothing to prepare, nothing to panic about. Not because you've figured it all out, but because you finally stopped needing to. This is the gift of emptiness, and it is safe to receive it. We end here, for now, and now, as the final breath of this journey settles in your body, something has shifted, quietly, gently, without force. The storm of overthinking has softened. The weight of what-ifs has lifted. And for the first time in a long time, peace doesn't feel like something distant. It feels like something familiar, like home. Because tonight, you didn't just listen to Buddhist teachings, you lived them. You walked through the cloud of thought and touched the sky of awareness. You stopped rehearsing problems and let the bell of silence ring. You let go of questions that don't need answers. You sat with discomfort without flinching. You saw through old stories and false identities. You released the illusion of control. You replaced anxious energy with presence, and you found, in the space behind every breath, something rare. The realization that you don't need to worry to be awake. That stillness is not emptiness, it's clarity. That surrender is not defeat, it's freedom. So if you feel lighter now, more grounded, more whole, it's because you remembered a truth the world keeps making us forget. Peace isn't found in fixing everything. It's found in letting go of the need to fix. And if these teachings moved something in you, even the smallest shift, leave a comment below and write, "I choose peace over worry." Let that be your quiet commitment to yourself, to your life, to your mind. And if you want more teachings like this, more calm, more clarity, more truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of stillness. Now close your eyes, let go, let sleep carry you, and let this be the beginning of a life with less fear and more freedom. Until next time, breathe easy, you are already free.